Prologue, rooting in broken earth. Just when you thought things couldn't get any worse, they do. Everyone has plans but no one can really predict the future, especially these days. There are a lot of high and mighty fools out there who think they can control the world but of course they can't. Lupira told the man across the table from her. She was dressed in a long white dress and petticoat. It was an oddly conservatively outfit for the consort and information dealer. Seems to me like the powerful are at least very skilled at keeping themselves on top, even if they obviously aren't very good at running anything. I'm a prime example of this, myself, the governor remarked with a self-depreciating chuckle. The two of them were by themselves in a small room off to the side of the governor's mansion in the center of Dagger Point. They were seated across from each other at a table and the morning sunlight poured into the room from a large window. Rulers and authorities come and go all the time. Most of them rarely leave much of a mark on the world before they're usurped by someone else ruthless, cunning, and equally replaceable, Lupira told him after taking a leisurely sip of wine. No, that's just not true. Even terrible rulers leave an impression, sometimes more so than good ones. Take a look at the state of the world around us. Who is to blame for all the wars, violence, and poverty if not some God's forsaken king somewhere, the governor replied. Who knows? I was just recently reminded that the world is a much larger place than people realize, and most of it has never been seen by human eyes, the woman commented. We've lived on this continent for hundreds of years but we never truly conquered it. Travel any direction but east and soon enough civilization just stops. To the west are the great empty plains, to the north lie dark frozen forests, and to the south grow the steaming jungles. We have no idea how large this continent even is. The lesson on geography is interesting but I believe you're talking about Herod's new pet, the older man said with a frown of distaste. It would be a very foolish mistake to think of Blacknail as anyone's pet. Meeting him was very eye-opening, in more ways than one, Lupira replied as she smirked smugly. The governor just rolled his eyes and poured himself another glass of wine. If you're trying to shock an old man then you're going to have to try much harder, Lupira. The rite of Beldiva was quite popular among the cult of Taranan when I was young, you know, he told his drinking companion. How intriguing, but I believe we've gotten off topic. I was talking about how the schemes of men and women are doomed to failure, Lupira responded. And I was disagreeing with you. I take it this isn't a completely philosophical argument, though? The man remarked. No, it definitely isn't. Now that spring has come and the roads have opened people have begun leaving the city. Just this morning Herod and her band headed back south for instance, the woman explained. Ah yes, the Black Snake goes to rejoin the rest of her forces and prepare for the coming storm. My own investigations, as undoubtedly have yours, have revealed that there are significant forces set against them. Thus, her ambitions seem doomed and I suppose that's an example of plans going awry, the governor remarked with a frown. The older man then took a deep drink of wine and sighed in fatigue. I just wish my own fate wasn't so tightly entwined with hers. If Herod falls and Warwick succeeds in unifying the rest of the bands then he won't have much use for me. The city doesn't need a neutral mediator if it has a king, he added. Lupira smiled reassuringly at the man. She was rather fond of him after all. Without him and the deal he'd made with the outlaw bands so many years ago there would be no Dagger Point, and he was one of the more interesting conversationalists around. I was actually thinking of the exact opposite. Warwick's mysterious backers are powerful and have obviously made some very long-term plans for all of us. Undoubtedly, they think they've accounted for everything but they haven't. The world is wider than they know and Herod could surprise them, she countered. So they'll try again. Even if the wolf somehow gets himself killed I'm sure they could find a replacement. That mercenary band of Zelenas was quite the shock. These people aren't fooling around, Herod is simply outmatched in this fight. I fear we will all soon be under someone's boot, he replied bitterly. You might be right. Things change and it may soon be time for the north to have a ruler. Herod certainly seems to be the underdog here, Lupira replied as she turned and gazed thoughtfully out the window. A second later she turned back to her companion. The north is not so easily predicted though, and lately things have been stranger than ever. I've recently expanded the scope of the information I collect, and what I've received so far paints a messy picture indeed, she told him. Like what? The governor asked in surprise. Things have begun to change. The outlaw bands have done as they pleased for years now but that time may be over. The smaller more isolated groups have started to disappear, something is preying on them. There are more and more reports of mutant and beast sightings, and just yesterday I got news of brazen attacks and thefts along the southern road by goblins. That hasn't happened in over 100 years. After turning on itself for so long, I fear humanity has begun to lose its grip on the north completely, she replied darkly. Surely, you're exaggerating, the startled older man asked. No, as much as we both detest the very idea, a king may be exactly what we need. It is possible that even in victory our would-be puppet masters may win themselves nothing. Rolling the dice 1. The loud creaking of the wagon's wheels was somewhat muted by the frequent thud of footsteps on the dusty ground of the road. The only other sounds to be heard were the wind through the trees and the restless rustling of leaves. Blacknail the hobgoblin looked up from where he'd been absent-mindedly inspecting a set of tracks next to the road, near a thick clump of coned reeds. The footprints had caught his interest but they had turned out to be from nothing more than wolves. The forests of the north contained many things much more dangerous than wild dogs. A dozen men and women were walking alongside a wagon that had been piled high with goods. Their clothing was mostly tough-looking leather and every one of them was armed. This wasn't surprising, since they were bandits who had just robbed a caravan and were now taking their spoils back to their base. What's the hobgoblin doing over there? A nearby blonde man nervously asked the scarred woman walking next to him. He's plotting to kill us in painful and humiliating ways, the woman replied sarcastically. Why are you bloody asking me? Why do you even care? He probably just smelled a rabbit or something. The outlaws had gotten some great loot. Black Nail knew this because he'd been happily looting the merchant caravan beside them. The bandits were his comrades and they all served under Harad the Black Snake. Not all the humans liked him, though. Some of them were jealous of his good looks and superior murder skills. Happily, a few demonstrations of those same skills had silenced the hobgoblin's most vocal critics. They'd been very impressed. Recently, Harad had ordered all her minions to charge tolls instead of outright robbing people, but the bandits' last target had been trying to sneak through her territory without paying. That meant they had to be made an example of, and so the hobgoblin had gotten to murder them and take their stuff. That was Black Nail's favorite part of being an outlaw. As soon as most the merchants were dead, the hobgoblin had immediately sniffed out all the best loot and taken it for himself. After some hissing and snarling to scare away the other bandits, 5 wheels of cheese, a pretty red cloak, 2 roast ducks, and bag of shiny stones were all his. He couldn't wait to get home and show Cedar. The old ranger had been the one who had trained him and taken him in when he'd been just a little goblin. What have you got there? A short cloaked man asked politely as he walked over. The man was one of the scouts with the mission. Black Nail was the other one. They were there to help track down their target and to keep watch on the forest. Most of Harad's scouts were friendly towards the hobgoblin, and greatly respected his master Cedar. The old ranger was the best scout in Harad's band. Nothing SS, just Wolf Prince, Black Nail replied happily. Ah, there's probably nothing to worry about then, Wire the scout said. Dunno, forest doggies aren't that dangerous but their SS are a bunch of people watching us from the trees behind SS me, the hobgoblin told him. What? How do you know? The man asked as he jerked in alarm. I smell SS their trail all along the road. They were just on SS it but they ran off in that direction when we got close, Black Nail explained. The hobgoblin's master Cedar would have been able to detect the watchers by observing the flight of birds, or something. Black Nail didn't need to do that because most humans smelled like a pile of shit on legs. They were hard to miss. Wire frowned thoughtfully and took a few seconds to process this. How many of them are there and what can you tell me about them? He asked. There are 3 men SS, all in good health, and they were waiting here for a while before we SS arrived, Black Nail replied with a shrug. Fuck, they're probably not friendly then, the short man cursed softly. I can't think of a good reason for a small group like that to be hanging out here in the middle of nowhere. I have the unpleasant suspicion that they were waiting for us here. Black Nail nodded in agreement. As a general rule everything out here in the forest was dangerous and hostile. Humans were also a very violent race. They started fights over the weirdest things. What are they planning, though? 3 men aren't a threat to us, the scout mused. Let's go ask them. I like asking people questions, Black Nail suggested. After a brief talk with the other bandits, Wire and the hobgoblin slipped into the bushes at the side of the road. Together, they stalked into the shadowy woods that bordered the road. They moved slowly and approached their target from the side to conceal themselves, but it soon became obvious their stealth was unnecessary. They didn't stick SS around. They all ran that way, Black Nail mused as he examined a boot print in muddy ground. The forest was still damp and wet from the spring melt. The mud made it easier to track their quarry but also harder to move. It also meant there were a lot of annoying insects flying around. That way leads back to the road. They must have slipped ahead of us, Wire pointed out as he swatted at an insect. That's not something innocent passers-by would do. It would be much safer just to hide and wait until we were gone. They were waiting SS for us and they've gone to tell someone that they've found SS, Black Nail suggested as he slapped a bug that had landed on the tip of his nose. Damn, I think you're right. We've got an ambush waiting ahead of us. It's the only thing that makes sense. They have to be out here for us, the scout cursed in acknowledgement. Black Nail got up and began moving back towards the road. Where are you going? His companion asked. I'm going to follow them. You stay here. I'll be right back, the hobgoblin answered as he broke out into a run. If these humans were going to meet up with their friends so they could all attack at once, the solution was simple. He would just run them down and kill them before that happened. It would be easy. Humans were fat and slow while he was not only a hobgoblin but a vessel as well. Black Nail's cloak billowed behind him as he raced through the trees. He crushed broad-leaved plants beneath his boots and smashed through the slight branches that tried to block his path. The hobgoblin could feel the elixir in his blood simmer as he unconsciously tapped into it to boost his speed. The ability to drink elixir and use it to strengthen himself was what made him a vessel. A shallow woodland stream appeared in front of him. It was flooded with water from the spring melt. Without stopping, Black Nail jumped across and landed on the other side. Wire was already out of sight behind him. The human scout couldn't keep up with Black Nail. A second later, Black Nail burst out of the forest and back out under the sun. He charged through the bushes and came to halt in the middle of the dirt road. He took a second to sniff the air and listen. He could hear the creak of the wagon his tribe had stolen down the road. The rest of his companions were now far behind him. He could smell the men he was tracking. The scent was old enough that he knew they were still ahead of him by a fair bit. With a gleeful hiss of anticipation, Black Nail kicked off the ground and started running down the road after his prey. At a full sprint, it didn't take him long to catch up. The hobgoblin heard the pounding of their footsteps before he saw them. There was a curve in the path ahead that blocked his sight, so he slowed down and glanced around it. There were 3 men in front of him, running down the dirt road at a steady pace. For a second Black Nail almost mistook them for members of his own tribe. Their clothes were the same worn-looking mix of leather and rugged cloth. They also carried themselves the same way. The hobgoblin didn't recognize any one of them or their scent, though. They were definitely strangers. Who were they? They were enemies, but of what kind? Black Nail licked his lips as the urge to hunt flowed through him. It didn't really matter who they were as long as they were acceptable prey. Now wasn't the time to think, it was the time to strike. The hobgoblin dashed off the road and back into the forest, where he was harder to see. He had a plan and he needed to get ahead of them for it to work. Black Nail didn't have time to move with absolute stealth, so he made a fair bit of noise as he trampled through the brush. Even puny pink human ears would probably be able to hear him. Pink was a silly color. What was that? The smallest of the men suddenly asked in a spooked tone as he heard something out in the forest. It was probably just a deer or something, one of his companions replied dismissively. Just keep moving. I want to put more distance between us and Herod's men, the last man added. With long strides, Black Nail passed the running men and moved ahead of them. Even out in the bush he could hear their footsteps. When he had a fair lead on them, he turned and moved back towards the road. From the shadows, the hobgoblin watched the three unsuspecting men approach. As he waited, Black Nail reached into his coat and pulled out a vial of liquid. The elixir in the vial tasted unpleasant as it hit his tongue, like dirty water with a hint of sour fruit. It had been a while since he'd last had any. He'd been using only the traces left over since his last drink. A familiar warmth spread throughout his body, from his toes to the top of his head. It was accompanied by a rush of energy, which mingled with his desire to hunt and drove it to new heights. His teeth ached with need. It was time to attack. As the three men passed through an area where the forest encroached closely upon the road, Black Nail drew his sword and launched himself out of the bushes. There were only a few feet between him and the closest man. The rustling of leaves as the hobgoblin charged alerted his prey. They didn't have enough time to react, though. Black Nail was already upon them. The closest man's eyes widened in horror as he fumbled for the blade at his hip. Before he could draw it, Black Nail's sword sank into his chest. The hobgoblin didn't even try to pull it free, but instead immediately drew two long knives and whirled to the side. The man to his left raised a sword and stepped forward. Black Nail reacted faster. Before his enemy's boot was firmly planted on the ground, the hobgoblin kicked his foot out from under him. Fuck, the man wheezed as he landed hard on his side. A silver sword sliced through the air towards the hobgoblin's head as the third man attacked. Black Nail dove under the swing. He slashed at the man's arms as they went by. His dagger cut through the man's sleeves and drew blood. The wounded man stepped back, but Black Nail stuck with him. The man's slow block didn't stop the hobgoblin from sliding to the side and slashing at his arms again. Black Nail sniggered as kept up the pressure. He dodged the increasingly frantic man's swings and attacked again and again. Soon, the man's arms were covered in bleeding cuts. He was having fun now. The second man climbed to his feet and charged the hobgoblin with his sword held high. Black Nail stepped back from the man he'd been fighting and spun out of the new attacker's way. Combat stopped for a second as everyone faced each other. Black Nail gave his two playmates a wide grin that showed off his sharp and long tongue. The two men took in his visage and they both flinched in fear. What the fuck is that? It's not human, asked with obvious terror as his face paled. I don't know, just kill it, the other responded as he raised his sword with shaking hands. Black Nail giggled to himself merrily. That was so not going to happen. The scent of blood was thick in the air and he had to suppress a shiver of excitement. He could sense the fear that was starting to undermine his prey now and destroy their resolve. The hobgoblin dove forward. One of his opponents countered with wide defensive swing, but the other jumped back in fear. Black Nail's move had been a feint, though. He bounced backwards out of the way of the sword, leaving the man overextended. With careful precision, the hobgoblin stepped forward and knocked the sword down with one dagger. There was a hollow gasp of pain as the other dagger sank into the man's side. The short steel blade parted flesh and slipped in under ribs as it cut its way into vital organs. You're dead, Black Nail whispered gleefully into his opponent's ear as the man began to collapse. The only remaining enemy's eyes went wide in terror. He stuttered as he tried to raise his sword up into a defensive stance. However, his cut-up arms shook and seemed to lose strength. With a moan of despair, the man's sword fell from his grip. Blood flowed down his mangled arms and dripped from his fingertips. The whimpering man immediately turned and ran. Black Nail laughed and then started humming cheerfully to himself as he pursued at a leisurely pace. His prey had no chance of escaping now. He had been hobbled and was leaving a trail of blood. The terrified man was dashing madly down the road away from the hobgoblin, but he didn't get very far. Soon enough, he tripped over his own feet. Black Nail laughed again when the man's attempt to catch himself failed. His arms gave out on him a second time and his face hit the dirt with a loud thud. There was the sound of whimpering as Black Nail walked over to him. It was shame, but it seemed the hunt was already over. His quarry had been no match for his elixir-powered speed and hobgoblin cunning. He was just too amazing. Black Nail crouched down and poked the fallen fighter in the shoulder. I think I'm supposed to ask you questions now, he mused to himself. Don't kill me. Oh, gods. Please don't kill me, the man sobbed weakly. No problem, just answer my questions. Who are you and why are you out here waiting for me and my friends? Black Nail replied cheerfully. The man's request was a simple one and more than worth the reward. Now that the hunt was over, his own bloodlust was waning. He felt no need to kill this man. You have friends? The confused man asked in disbelief. Black Nail scowled and poked the man again. This human was kind of rude. His long fingernail jabbed into an open wound and the man spasmed in pain. The men from earlier. The ones you were watching, the hobgoblin hissed in answer. Sorry, I'm sorry, the man moaned. We were sent to watch the road in case any of Herod's men came by. We were headed back to tell the rest of our squad you were coming. The hobgoblin took a second to think this over and licked his finger clean. It sounded a lot like an ambush. Who would be stupid enough to fight Herod's men here in her own territory, though? His chieftain had a lot of warriors and was a dangerous vessel as well. How many of USS are there, and who do you work for? Black Nail asked his captive. Please, don't eat me. There are 30 men at the camp. They're just an hour down the road, and we work for Warwick, the man quickly answered as the hobgoblin stared down at him. Black Nail shifted in surprise. He knew that name. When he'd gone to the human city of Daggerpoint with Herod it had been mentioned a lot. A lot of the groups of bandits and human warriors they had fought in the city had been working for him. I'm not going to eat you. I said I wouldn't already. Now tell me, what does Warwick want? The hobgoblin asked next. Warwick was someone Herod really wanted dead, and the feeling was mutual. He was a bandit lord just like Herod, which explained why the men Black Nail had just fought seemed somewhat familiar. To kill Herod, the captive replied nervously. We're just the tip of the spear. He's coming here himself and bringing all his men with him, hundreds of them. He intends to destroy the Black Snake, and he has more than enough swords to do it. The man on the ground tensed as if expecting to be poked again. Black Nail just smiled instead. It sounded like there was a war coming. What fun. The hobgoblin knew his chieftain. There was no way she would be taken down easily. Black Nail had watched her slaughter foes that outnumbered her before. This time would be no different. Although, before he joined back up with her and his master Cedar he was going to have to escape the ambush waiting for him. He had almost forgotten about that. Rolling the dice too. It took several minutes for Wire to catch up, and a few more after that for the wagon to arrive. Black Nail was seated on a rock at the edge of the forest. The hobgoblin hummed cheerfully to himself as he watched them come down the road towards him. When his slow human comrades were close enough, he hopped off the rock and walked over to them. Wire and the others warily drew to a stop as Black Nail came towards them. I see you've been busy, Wire remarked as he took in the bodies that littered the ground. Are any of them still alive? Yep, that one there, Black Nail replied as he pointed. I'm not stupid. I asked him a lot of important questions. Oh, what did you learn? The short scout asked with obvious interest. They don't have any cheese, Black Nail answered with grunt of disappointment. Anything else? The scout asked as he gave Black Nail an annoyed glare. Yep, these guys brought us a lot of friends, the hobgoblin added. They're camped up ahead of us. Scowls and various looks of displeasure appeared on everyone's faces. A pair of bandits turned and scanned the road up ahead, as if they expected attackers to appear at any second. Good thing you stopped them, then, one of the bandits remarked. Yes, nice job, Black Nail. Did your captive happen to mention why they want us dead and who they are? Wire inquired. The hobgoblin smiled at the compliment. He had done a good job. He was such an amazing scout and ranger. Yep, I asked that. They're all part of the army Warwick sent to kill us all, Black Nail explained happily. There was a shocked silence as everyone took this in. The hobgoblin gave the humans a few seconds so that their slow brains could catch up. Sometimes watching humans think was like waiting for someone to light a fire by striking two rocks together. It took a lot of time and effort to get a good spark. Ah, that would certainly make sense, Wire eventually mused aloud. What the fuck? Bloody hells, I hope that's some sort of weird hobgoblin joke, one of the other bandits exclaimed in shock. If it is then it's not bloody funny, another added. My jokes are funny, Black Nail muttered to himself. He didn't make a lot of jokes but when he did people laughed. He was fairly sure they were laughing with him. Maybe, he's making this up. Are we going to trust his word? Another scared-sounding bandit added. Why wouldn't we? Wire replied sternly. He has no reason to lie about this. I'm not a liar, Black Nail hissed as he shuffled over and gave his captive a kick. He's telling the truth, the man on the ground grunted. Black Nail gave the man who had questioned him a mean stare. Everyone else turned to look at the captive. They had forgotten he was still alive, because he certainly didn't look like it. The man was lying on his stomach with his wounded arms beside him. His face was turned away from them and pressed against the dusty ground. See, you're being paranoid, Wire told the blonde man. Bah, why are you defending a bloody hobgoblin? That thing kills everyone around him, the blonde man exclaimed. I don't kill everybody. Black Nail countered reproachfully. That would be pointless and a lot of work. Look, I left the captive alive. We're even friends now. You're friends? Wire asked skeptically. The scout turned to look at the prone form of the cut-up man Black Nail had chased down. The cuts on his arms had mostly stopped bleeding but the long scarlet gashes and the trails of blood they had created across the dusty road were still very visible. Even the slight rising and falling of his chest as he breathed looked painful. Yep, we are definitely friends now, Black Nail announced loudly as he gave the man on the ground a light kick. I saved his life, from myself. We're the best of friends, the man on the ground coughed painfully a second later. I'd hate to see his enemies, someone muttered. I'm pretty sure that's not how that works. You can't save him from yourself, Wire pointed out. Then I saved him from you. If you had caught him would you have left him alive? Black Nail added with undeterred enthusiasm. Probably not, Wire reluctantly agreed. Me neither, one of the other bandits added as there were mutters of accord from the rest. I promised to let him live and everything. Black Nail added to support his argument. He had kind of forgotten where he was going with this, but that wasn't going to stop him. And that's actually a promise you intend to keep? Wire asked with morbid curiosity. Why not? I have no reason to kill him. I am a nice person. Black Nail responded. Also, Cedar said lying was bad ss. If you're good and never lie then people will start to believe everything you say. That sounds amazing. Wire blinked in surprise. He stared at the hobgoblin for several seconds. The scout's face was completely blank and revealed nothing as the hobgoblin beamed at him. Ah, words of wisdom if I ever heard them, he remarked deadpan a second later. After a few moments Wire turned away and walked over to the prisoner. He crouched over the man and began to ask him questions of his own. When he was done he turned back to Black Nail. Let's get going now. Apparently, we have a hostile army to avoid. Do you just plan on leaving this guy here? Wire asked the hobgoblin as he stood up. Black Nail hadn't really thought about it. He wasn't against Wire's plan, though. It certainly sounded like the least amount of work. Sure, he can stay here. He won't be able to catch up to us and no one should find him for a while, Black Nail reassured the other scout. Something will probably eat him, like wolves, or a hobgoblin, one of the other bandits muttered. Black Nail ignored the comment and turned back to the man on the ground. When you do get back to your comrades remember to tell them how scary I am. I'm frightening, you know. Black Nail bragged. I know, the man replied dryly as he turned and stared in fascinated horror at the hobgoblin. Black Nail liked how his new friend was absolutely terrified of him. He should probably encourage this behavior in others. Also, I'm going to come back here soon and kill everyone in their sleep, Black Nail explained cheerfully to his captive. I've been told I'm good at that. Make sure you tell everyone that. I'll let you live again though because we're friends. Thanks, I think, the man replied quietly. He sounded somewhat delirious and out of it. Black Nail gave him an encouraging pat on the head to cheer him up. Come on, leave him, Wire told the hobgoblin. We need to go. The longer we stay here the more likely it is they'll send someone to check up on their lookouts. With a sigh of resignation, Black Nail nodded and got up. Altogether, the bandits then started down the road again. One of them maneuvered the creaking wagon around the bodies of the fallen. The horse pulling it seemed more worried about keeping an eye on Black Nail than anything else. Before he got very far down the road, Black Nail suddenly stopped. He turned back towards the last surviving member of Warwick's men. He'd just had a great idea. I'll also spare people who leave cheese out in the woods for me. Tell everyone, he shouted before turning and jogging after the rest of his group. When the hobgoblin had rejoined the others, Wire turned to him and coughed loudly to get everyone's attention. We slipped the news just now, when Black Nail took out those scouts, but we're still in danger. The enemy is between us and safety and our wagon is far from stealthy. They'll spot it from a mile away, he told them. Then let's just dump it, a nervous-sounding man commented. Black Nail gave the man a mean glare to shut him up. His cheese was still on that wagon. Wire also scowled and shook his head. I'm not going to be the one to explain its loss to Harad. Are you? He asked. When no one replied, the scout continued talking. The road's the only way back, anyway. Black Nail and I might survive a jaunt through the forest but I doubt most of you will. No, we're going to clear the route for the wagon and then make for safety as fast as possible, he said. By clearing the road you mean killing people, right? Black Nail asked. Yes, Wire answered. Good, I can do that, the hobgoblin replied confidently. Wire ignored the smiling hobgoblin. The enemy will have sentries posted somewhere along the road. I'll take the north side and Black Nail will take the south. Together, we'll sweep ahead of wagon and take out their sentries unseen. You're going to do everything by yourselves, the sole female bandit present asked. If we need help we'll come back and get it. If we don't then you'll just be a liability. It's over either way if we get spotted, Wire explained. No one else had any questions after that so they resumed their trek. Only when they got a little closer to where the enemy was supposed to be did Wire signal for the wagon to slow. He and Black Nail then both stepped into the woods on opposite sides of the road. The hobgoblin licked his lips as he slipped through the bushes. He was on full alert and excited as he stalked silently under the trees. Today was going to be such a great day. He was going to hunt, not once, but twice. The speckled shadows of leaves cast by the branches above darkened the woods. Even though the road was so close the forest here was dark and oppressive. Only a light covering of small leafy plants grew across the ground. It wasn't so dark that the hobgoblin thought he would run into any giant spiders but he kept a lookout for webs just in case. He really didn't like those creepy things. Black Nail came across a well-worn animal path and stopped to sniff the earth. He could smell traces of rabbits and wolves. He also thought he detected a faint whiff of harpy. Wolves and harpies could both be dangerous in large groups but Black Nail wasn't too worried about them. Food was plentiful in the spring and neither would risk attacking him. Even without a steel blade in hand and magic lurking in his blood, a hunting hobgoblin was more than a match for them. With his focused eyes full of forest green, Black Nail continued on. There was so little underbrush around he had to move carefully to stay out of the sight of any watchers. Tall tree trunks stretched out before him in every direction. Soon, the ground began to slope upwards towards a hill. Black Nail eyed it carefully from below. He didn't see any sign of enemies, but he couldn't see the top of the hill and it would be a perfect vantage point from which to watch the road. It would be difficult to make the climb undetected by someone above, so the hobgoblin waited and observed for a while. Patience was often the key to catching prey. He couldn't wait too long, though. The wagon was still moving down the road and would shortly come into sight. His patience was soon rewarded. Black Nail heard a rustling sound and then a murmur of voices. The hobgoblin's long green ears perked up. The noise was clearly coming from atop the hill. There were definitely people up there. Grab my bag when you go, someone out of sight said. If I'm going to be stuck here, I want it. And don't take too long. There's supposed to be 2 of us here. Someone muttered a reply. Black Nail then watched intently from behind a thick tree trunk as a rough-looking man with brown hair made his way down the hill. This was perfect. Carefully, the hobgoblin drew his sling and loaded it with a rock. A second later, the unsuspecting man collapsed after a rock ricocheted off his head. Smiling smugly to himself, the hobgoblin dragged his victim's body out of sight. Black Nail then walked up the slope. At first he moved silently, but then the last sentry's back came into sight and he sped up. The man was preoccupied with watching the road and not looking his way. Do you have my stuff? The sentry asked. Nope, Black Nail replied as he bashed the man in the back of the head with a rock. The hobgoblin then just had to wait a few minutes for the wagon to roll into sight. From atop the tree-covered hill he watched it make its way across the road. When it was safely past the lookout spot, he jumped down the hill and ran to catch up with the others. You're back. Murder anyone while you were gone? The leading bandit asked Black Nail when he stepped out of the forest. Just 2, Black Nail replied as he held up a pair of fingers. I found the enemy sentries. Good, did you find the camp? The man asked. Nope, I didn't see it SS. Maybe it's on Wire's side of SS the road, Black Nail answered. It is, and we need to move faster, the aforementioned scout announced as he stepped out of the woods. There were no sentries watching the road on my side, but they had a few around the camp. I only got a quick look, but it's not small or unorganized. It looks like a military camp and they have at least a few horses. You think they'll notice their sentries are missing soon and send riders after us? The female bandit asked. Of course, the gods never miss a chance to mess with us mere mortals, Wire replied. We're simply going to have to move as fast as possible. It's all we can do. What if they just ride us down? Someone who sounded nervous asked. Black Nail sympathized. Being chased by a bunch of horses with people on them didn't sound like fun to him either. From experience he knew it didn't usually end well for the person without a horse. Depends, if there are only a few of them then we'll fight. If there are too many for us to handle then we'll make for the woods. They'll have to dismount to follow us, the short scout explained. There were a quick series of acknowledgements from everyone present and then they all picked up the pace. Wire gave the chestnut horse pulling the wagon a slap on its flank. The beast snorted disdainfully in response and gave the man an annoyed look, but it began moving faster as well. Black Nail did his best to ignore the stupid creature as he jogged alongside the others. Can't you humans go any faster? This is very slow. Black Nail remarked after a while. We have to keep this pace up all day if we want to make it back to camp, one of the bandits replied angrily. So? It's still really slow. Stop being so lazy and go faster, the hobgoblin told him. I'm not bloody lazy. This is as fast as we can go. We're not all hobgoblins, vessels, or batshit insane like you, the man shot back. Hey, I guess, Black Nail replied as he ran. After a moment of thought he dropped back to talk to Wire. What do you want? The scout asked. We need to run faster, the hobgoblin told him. Unless you know magic or at least an incredibly inspiring running song, that's not going to happen, the man huffed in reply. No, but I do have a plan. I could go to the back and poke the slowest runner with a sharp stick until they go faster, Black Nail explained. Tempting, but no. I'm going to have to pass on that, Wire chuckled in response. Ugh, fine, the hobgoblin sighed. With such slow idiots for companions there was no way the group was going to be able to outrun anyone. Black Nail picked up the pace. If they got chased down he planned on being at the front where it was safer. All the slow humans could take the brunt of the attack. Maybe that would motivate them to move faster. The running continued for quite a while. The sun overhead slipped behind a cover of thick white clouds and its light dimmed. All of a sudden there was a chill to the wind, as if winter hadn't quite gone away yet. The air's touch raised goosebumps along Black Nail's exposed skin and he shivered slightly. The creaking of wooden wheels and heavy wheezing from the nearby humans filled the hobgoblin's ears. Up ahead of him the road made a sudden turn. A particularly tall tree stood on the very corner of the bend. Its long trunk had grown on a slant and its drooping branches hung over the road. Black Nail was watching it out of the corner of his eye when he saw movement. As he focused, a figure stepped out from under the tree and froze in surprise. Several other people quickly appeared around him and pointed towards the hobgoblin's group. Uh-oh, this wasn't good. There are men ahead SS of us, Black Nail hissed in alarm as he skidded to a stop. Shit, I see them too, Wire swore. The rest of their party stopped. The horse neighed when one of the bandits pulled on its reins to stop it. There was tension in the air as everyone stared at the new arrivals. There shouldn't be anyone from Herod's camp out this way, Wire commented. Whoever they are they've got us cut off, someone added. More and more people came into sight up ahead. There were at least as many of them as there were bandits in Black Nail's group, and who knew how many more were still out of sight. The hobgoblin heard one of the unknown men shout, and suddenly blades began to appear in their hands. Draw your weapons and get ready for a fight, Wire commanded everyone. Black Nail drew his blade and threw a worried glance back at the wagon. It had finally happened, they had come for his cheese. Rolling the dice 3. Black Nail, the hobgoblin, snarled as the unidentified humans in front of him drew closer. They had weapons in hand and looked ready for a fight. Well, if it was a fight they wanted, then that was what they were going to get. No stupid humans would be getting their dirty hands on his tasty cheese without a fight. We must defend the loot. Black Nail growled loudly to his companions. Behind the hobgoblin, those of his fellow bandits that hadn't already taken out their weapons did so. The ranger Wire pulled out a bow and hurriedly strung it. It wasn't a particular long bow, but next to his short stature it looked large. Why are we listening to the bloody hobgoblin? One of the bandits whined with an edge of panic in his voice. When did that start to make sense? They're murderous savages. Maybe the horse has some tactics it would like to share as well. We're not listening to the hobgoblin. We're doing what Herat ordered us to, bring this wagon back to base, Wire responded in a harsh commanding voice. We should leave the wagon and head into the forest. This must be a trap. There are probably more of them coming up behind us, the scared bandit said as he threw a nervous look backwards down the road. Black Nail growled. If the coward was allowed to run, then the others would follow, and that was no good. The humans had to stay here and fight to protect his cheese. I don't hear anyone behind us and they haven't surprised us. How could it be a trap, stupid human? The hobgoblin pointed out scornfully. What does a beast like you know? We need to run, the man shot back. Black Nail growled again in annoyance, and stepped up beside the man. If you run SS you'll never make it. Something terrifying out in the woods will kill us you slowly and painfully, me, he whispered to the cowardly man. The bandit paled and took a step back from the hobgoblin. He then threw a nervous look towards Wire. The scout was too far away to have heard Black Nail, but he noticed the other man's reaction. Stand your ground, both of you, Wire ordered. There's no need to run yet. Black Nail's right. I see no sign of us being encircled and they seem just as surprised as us to have run into company here. Black Nail did as he was told. Not because Wire was his boss, he wasn't, but because it was what he wanted to do anyway. Up ahead, one of the unidentified people detached from the rest and walked forward. His hand was raised up to shield the sun from his eyes. He appeared to be trying to get a good look at Black Nail and the bandits. Hey, I think that's Boots, the female bandit standing next to Wire exclaimed. They're not enemies at all, they're from Herad's camp. We've got reinforcements. Black Nail turned and looked. He squinted at the approaching man but could only make out the blurry outline of a face. Well, most humans looked alike anyway. It seems we hit a spot of good luck after all. Come on, get the wagon moving. Let's see what brings our fellows out this way. Not that I'm complaining, Wire announced as he started to walk forward. There was a loud neigh and the creaking of straining wood as the horse hitched to the wagon was signaled into motion again. Black Nail and several other bandits put away their blades and followed after Wire. Most the tension from earlier had already faded away. Now everyone seemed relieved and excited. Soon, the other group came into focus, and it became obvious they were from Herad's camp. Black Nail recognized several of them, even if he had never bothered to learn most their names. Most bandits with less status than him weren't that important. Black Nail quickly recognized the man leading the other group, though. It was his master, Cedar. The hobgoblin perked up and smiled happily. Now he could brag about all the amazing things he had done on this mission. His master was sure to be proud of him. You're early. Did you forget to pack enough food or something? Cedar yelled their way. And you're not supposed to be out here at all. We almost ended up charging you. Wire shot back. Did Herad finally kick you out, or did you just miss us? Bah, more likely you were about to piss yourselves and run, and who would miss your faces? Black Nail's the best looking out of all of you, Cedar replied. No, one of the patrols ran across some signs of movement so we're checking it out. Black Nail grinned smugly to himself after hearing his master's words. He was an amazingly handsome hobgoblin after all. Obviously, none of the humans could match the beauty of his long pointy nose. It was just the perfect length and shape. Wire started to say before Black Nail cut him off. I'm right here, master, the hobgoblin shouted as he waved enthusiastically in his master's direction. I saved everyone's lives like twice. I also killed some enemies, snuck around a lot, and found some cheese. I'm glad you had fun, the old scout replied as he rolled his eyes and signaled for Wire to speak up. Black Nail's feelings were a bit hurt, but he would have plenty of time to talk to his master later. As I was saying, on our way back we ran into some unexpected company, which would explain the signs of activity you found. It seems Warwick is on his way here, the other scout explained. Cedar frowned as he and Wire met in the middle of the road. The pair began talking and comparing notes. Neither of them looked happy. Black Nail found their talk boring. He already knew all that stuff. As he idled away the time, the hobgoblin saw a hint of something that might be a berry bush off to one side of the forest. All the walking had made him hungry, so he decided to investigate. Stay here, Cedar commanded the hobgoblin, after only a brief glance his way. Black Nail sighed in annoyance but did as he was told. He spun around and made his way back over to the wagon. He had some snacks tucked away on it. No one could complain if he ate those now. A few minutes later, after Black Nail had finished shoving half a loaf of bread down his throat, Cedar and Wire decided on a course of action. The pair of scouts called all the other bandits over, and they gathered around. There's no point sticking around, Cedar told everyone. We have no idea how many men Warwick has here. That camp may not be the only one, and we need to get the wagon back to base. Later, I'm sure Herad will want to send a few squads out to watch and harass the enemy, but that's not our job right now. Wire added. No one argued with them. All the other bandits simply nodded or said nothing. Most of them were deserters, and they hadn't left the army because it didn't fight enough. After a bit more instruction, everyone got moving again. The two groups of bandits melded seamlessly into one and started back down the road towards camp. Cedar had a rearguard put together to protect the wagon, but no one attacked them. The only sign of the enemy was a single horseman off in the distance that observed them for a while before disappearing. It was rather disappointing to Black Nail, really. The walls of thick bushes and trees that flanked the road eventually widened to reveal a barricade of tall, lashed together stakes. Black Nail gave the men guarding it a friendly wave. They were also part of Herad's tribe. Behind the crude wall lay Black Nail's home, the camp of the bandit chieftain Herad. The barrier was pulled to the side and the captured wagon rolled in, along with all the men and women accompanying it. Cedar and Black Nail took a minute to unpack their gear and settle down after the trip. The hobgoblin had to make sure all his prizes and tasty treats were hidden away where he'd left them. "You're all back early," Red Dog commented as he walked over to them. "Should I be concerned?" Black Nail looked over from where he was prying open one of the sacks on the wagon. Red Dog was the lieutenant whom Herad had left in charge of the camp when she had gone to Dagger Point last fall. Red Dog had been very disappointed to see Black Nail return with her. He had hoped that the hobgoblin had run off into the wild, never to be heard of again except in unsettling campfire stories. "We need to talk to Herad. Things are moving quickly and not in a good way. It looks like some of Warwick's men are moving into our territory," Cedar told him. "So I should be concerned," Red Dog replied with a sigh. "Damnation, I was hoping for another easy spring of robbery. Shit like you're talking about is how honest bandits like myself get themselves killed." "Honest bandits?" Wire asked in amusement. "I don't pretend to be anything else," Red Dog replied with a shrug. "And here I thought you were without virtue," Cedar commented. "But enough chit-chat, we need to report to Herad." "I'll let you talk to her," Wire added. "She seems to like you best." The older scout gave the younger one an annoyed glare but didn't say anything. Instead, he turned back to Red Dog. "Where is she?" he asked the other man. "The boss is at Vorshaw's cabin, right now. They're talking about supplies and stuff," Red Dog answered. "I might as well go with you. It sounds like this is going to throw all our plans up in the air." "Come along then," Cedar grunted as he started off towards Vorshaw's cabin. Black Nail followed his master as they marched through the camp. Crudely constructed wooden cabins of various sizes littered the clearing. They had all been built last year as shelter from the winter that had just passed. Many of them were large barracks-like structures that housed groups of bandits. The grass that had once dominated the clearing had long since been trampled down into dirt that was dusty in dry weather and muddy after the rain. In the center of the camp stood the old farmhouse Herad had taken as her own. Along the edges of the camp the tall trees of the northern forest loomed, reminding everyone that they were far from true civilization here. Herad was indeed talking to Vorshaw. The pair of them were standing out front of her cabin as they conversed. Of the two women, Herad was very much the smaller. She was only of average size. When Cedar and the others came around the corner of another building, Vorshaw saw them and pointed their way. "What brings all you lazy bastards back so quickly?" "I hope for your own sake that you actually followed my orders," Herad asked as she turned towards the new arrivals. "I certainly did, as always. The men you sent with Black Nail ran into some trouble after taking their spoils and hurried back here with news," Cedar explained in a carefully neutral tone. By the time he had finished, a cold look had appeared on Herad's face. Well, colder than usual. Herad always looked like she was one step away from violence. Black Nail tried to attract her attention as little as possible, unless he had something to brag about. The bandit chieftain ran her fingers through her short black hair as she considered Cedar's words. Her dark eyes stood out from her pale skin and were narrowed in thought. "Well, this isn't completely unexpected. We thought it likely that Warwick, and the fucking bloody bastards that he has backing him, would move against us," the bandit chieftain replied as she scowled. "They're moving very quickly, though. Faster than we thought they would," Vorshaw pointed out. The large brunette woman spoke with a hint of concern in her voice. She was wearing a loose cloth shirt, and crossed her arms in front of her in a way that highlighted both her lean muscles and her ample chest. "Doesn't matter," Herad responded. "The longer he waits the more men and equipment Warwick can rally. Having him move this early is to our benefit, not his. The impatient fool is underestimating me." "You're right, and that has me worried. Why is Warwick moving so quickly?" "He knows you won't be easy to beat in your own territory. He must be very confident for some reason," Cedar pointed out. "I'd be confident too if I had the kind of backing he did," Vorshaw countered. "With those crooked merchants behind him he can probably afford to lose his entire army and then just buy a new one. Manpower isn't hard to come by out here, with all the deserters feeling the southern wars. True, in Dagger Point his Lieutenant Zelena used mercenaries. I would be very surprised if Warwick hasn't hired a few more," Cedar added. "If he relies on outside forces too much the other bands will never accept him," Herad replied with a disdainful sneer. "He can't just buy himself an army and use it to control the north. That would make him too much like a conquering outsider out to crush all banditry. That won't do us much good if we're dead," Red Dog muttered. "If Warwick does come against me with a mercenary host then I'll retreat and wait," Herad replied as she drew one of the many daggers she had tucked around her person. Idly, the bandit chieftain toyed with it as she spoke. "He'll have to leave eventually to deal with other bands and then we'll raid the forces he leaves behind. He won't be able to conquer the north with strength of arms alone. He needs to convince the other bands to follow him, and to do that he has to convince them he's one of them," she told her subordinates. Cedar nodded in agreement. A flash of annoyance gleamed in Herad's eyes for a second in response. The old scout's approval always seemed to anger her for some reason. Most the outlaws I've worked with came north to escape the rule of kings, Cedar explained. They wouldn't fall to their knees and accept Warwick as their master if he looked like a southern puppet out to destroy their livelihood and freedom. Which means we just have to worry about Warwick's band and maybe a little outside support. He must have left some men behind, but he undoubtedly still has more than us, Vorshaw pointed out skeptically. I'm not too worried if that's all he brings to the table, Herad said. We have the defensive advantage. We know the terrain, have fortifications up, and are building more. I've outmaneuvered him before and this time will be no different. We need to be prepared. We should speed up construction, double our patrols, and cancel all leave. Every man in camp should be assigned to a job until Warwick is defeated, Vorshaw suggested. Practical as always, Vorshaw. Herad responded approvingly. I'll leave organizing that up to you. Off to one side, Red Dog sighed regretfully and grimaced to himself. Black Nail took a not-so-casual step behind Cedar, where he was harder to notice. He wanted to avoid being given a job. The talk lasted for a few more minutes before Herad dismissed everyone. Cedar and Black Nail were given the rest of the day off, and they headed back towards their campsite. They lived in a pair of tents off to one side of the encampment, near the forest, instead of one of the larger buildings. Both of them had spent the winter in Dagger Point and liked to live simply. Everything Cedar owned could be packed up in a few minutes. As soon as they arrived, Black Nail happily ran over to his tent and began to unpack all his stuff. All the yummy snacks, shiny trinkets, and hard-won loot he had acquired from his last mission had to be put away. If he just left it out, then a despicable thief would probably steal it. Some people were just savages. The hobgoblin took off his cloak and outer garments, flipped open the door to his tent, and crawled inside. The interior was small, but once inside Black Nail's body heat immediately started to heat the place up. Beneath him a small collection of blankets carpeted the floor, and his own familiar scent filled the air. The hobgoblin gave out an unexpected yawn and collapsed onto the ground. He leisurely shifted the blankets beneath himself as he closed his eyes and smiled. It was so comfy and warm here. If it wasn't for the need to eat and drink, he would never leave. Black Nail gathered up a clump of blankets and rested his head on them like a pillow. One of the sheets was little more than a beat-up rag, but the hobgoblin didn't care. In fact, that rag was his favorite by far. It had been given to him by his master when Black Nail had been nothing more than a little goblin. His memories from way back then were blurry and confused, but when he held the blanket close and smelled it, he was overcome by a sense of security and something else. Was it comfort and appreciation? It was a nice feeling anyway. It made him feel warm inside. A few seconds later, Black Nail let out a deep breath and opened his eyes. He wanted to rest some more but knew he had things to do. Reluctantly, he reached into his pockets and started removing the best of his new acquisitions. A small metal figurine was taken out and placed off to one side. The tiny warrior's bronze surface was dull, but it still had a slight shine to it. Next, a glass eye was put down beside it. Black Nail snickered to himself as he remembered how he'd gotten that. Fun times. Oh, there was also a little bit of biscuit in there. Black Nail pulled the chunk out of his pocket and shoved it into his mouth. He chewed on it as he slipped out of his tent and back outside. Up in the sky, the sun was a fair bit past midday peak. Small fluffy clouds were scattered around it, but they didn't block its light. The hobgoblin looked down in at the human dwellings around him. He had a thoughtful expression on his face. The first thing that had to be done was chores, so Black Nail went to find the person he'd told to do them all. Rolling the dice 4. The hobgoblin threw his cloak on and went to find Ilya. Before he'd left to go on his last mission, Black Nail had given his minion a list of chores to complete. Black Nail had saved Ilya's life, or something, back in Dagger Point. He'd forgotten the details, but the important bit was that he'd taken the man in as his minion. All the other important bandits had minions, so Black Nail needed at least one. Eventually, Black Nail found Ilya outside one of the barracks. The blonde young man was standing several feet from a group of men playing dice. There was a small crowd around the players, watching them play. Elias was at the very back. "What are you doing?" the hobgoblin asked as he stepped up right behind the young man. Elias hadn't seen him coming. He rose almost half a foot into the air as he twitched in fear. A look of unrestrained terror appeared on his face for a split second before he got control of himself. "Ah, what the hell's," he gasped in shock. You're not supposed to be back yet." Several other bandits noticed Black Nail and gave him wary looks, but they soon turned back to the game. They were used to him. "Some enemies showed up, so we came back quickly," Black Nail explained cheerfully. "Damnation, what's with my luck? I can't ever catch a break," Elias muttered to himself in a muted manner that Black Nail could totally hear. "Have you been a good SS minion and done the jobs I gave you?" the hobgoblin asked him. Black Nail knew it was important to keep your minions occupied. His master had certainly made sure he had been busy all the time. You also had to be firm but fair with minions. Yay. "I did, Black Nail," the young man answered. "Your firewood has been replaced, and I made sure no one went near your tent. What about all the traps? You emptied them?" Black Nail asked coldly as he stared into the man's eyes. No. I was going to, but when I got out there something had torn most of them apart," Ilya replied uncertainly. Black Nail scowled at the man and stared him down. He was disappointed in his minion. The young bandit wilted under his gaze. "Then you fix them SS." Black Nail suddenly hissed angrily in explanation. "I know you can make the string and set up the traps. The hobgoblin's long tongue wormed its way out from between his teeth as he spoke. Ilya paled and furtively glanced around for anything that would help him or distract the hobgoblin. He didn't find it. Meanwhile, Black Nail had to fight to suppress a smirk. He wasn't actually that angry. He'd been the one that had destroyed the traps, and he'd known Ilya wouldn't fix them. It was all part of the teaching process. I'll get right on it, I swear, the blonde young man exclaimed fearfully. Just let me grab my gear. Fine, but I'm checking the snares SS tonight, and if they're not done, the hobgoblin drawled threateningly. Black Nail then snorted disdainfully and stomped away with over-exaggerated anger. He could feel Ilya watching him leave. A few seconds later, the hobgoblin walked around the corner of a building. Once he was out of sight, Black Nail stopped and swiftly turned back around. He then peeked stealthily back at the group of people around Ilya and listened in. He was pretty sure Ilya was going to be bad and slack off. There's got to be some way I can give that creature the slip, the young man complained to the bandit next to him. His compatriot was a tall man with a pot belly and long black beard. He was dressed in rough furs. Unlike Ilya, he had been part of Herod's band since before Black Nail had joined. I wouldn't try it if I were you, the large man replied with an unfriendly smile. Just do what he says and don't piss him off. Let me tell you, some extra work is nothing. Fresh meat like you usually goes through much worse. That's right, a bald woman with a vicious scar across her face added. I've seen pretty boys like you forced to do all sorts of things. Although, maybe you're the type that wouldn't mind having a big strong guy to look after you and keep you warm at night. No, thanks, Ilya responded as he grimaced in distaste. Ha, then get to work, the bearded bandit laughed. I will, right after this round is finished. I want to see who wins so I know who to play with when I join in later, Ilya replied distractedly as he watched the gamblers in front of him. There was a clatter of wooden dice and then murmurs of appreciation from the crowd as one of the players got a good roll. You'd be much better off not playing. Even if you somehow ended up winning, that would be worse than losing for you, the bearded bandit told him. Elias muttered vaguely in response and stepped closer to get a better look at the players. He seemed too focused on the game to pay the other man much attention. From his hiding spot, Black Nail sighed and shook his head. Ilya was going to get himself in trouble. He obviously wasn't that smart. It was a good thing he had Black Nail to look out for him. Well, that was a problem, or entertainment, for later. Black Nail didn't feel like harassing Ilya anymore right now. It would be more educational, and amusing, to punish him later when he didn't fix the snares in time. The hobgoblin turned around and headed back to his tent. It had been over an hour since he had last eaten a full meal, so he was hungry again. Time sure went by quickly when you were having fun. On the way back, Black Nail passed by Vorshaw's home again. Herod and Vorshaw were both long gone, but the large woman's minion and mate Geralt was now outside. The skinny human was leaning against the building's entranceway while talking with Red Dog and another man. Red Dog's hands were moving energetically as he spoke to Geralt, and their conversation was loud and boisterous enough that it drew Black Nail's attention. Maybe something important was going on? Fuck, and I was planning on going to town soon. I guess I won't be getting roaring drunk and visiting the brothels after all, Red Dog cursed. Get yourself a lover in camp. It's cheaper and you won't spend so many cold nights alone, Geralt had told him. No thanks. I prefer my women to be less dirty and not so well armed. Give me a flower-scented whore over the women in this camp any day, Red Dog replied with a wince. I find that comment to be more than a little insulting, Geralt had replied as his face took on an affronted expression. Ha, who cares? Everyone knows you only shack up with Vorshaw for protection. Although, I wouldn't mind feeling up those big tits of hers once or twice myself, the third bandit interjected with a laugh and some rude hand gestures. The speaker was a man of average height, but he looked away a fair bit. His arms and legs were thick, if somewhat soft-looking instead of muscled. His round face was covered by a short, patchy, brown beard. Geralt glared at the bandit angrily. They were about the same height, but Geralt was much lighter and his face was clean-shaven. He was one of the few bandits in camp that bothered with shaving regularly. I'll have you take that back, Yurik. You shouldn't talk like that about Vorshaw or me, Geralt exclaimed furiously. Are you going to make me, pretty boy? Because I don't think you can, Yurik replied with disdainful sneer. From where he was watching, Black Nail sighed and rolled his eyes. Why did Geralt keep picking fights with people bigger than him? It was stupid. He should just stab them from behind. Don't start a fight, Yurik. I'll be very pissed if you make me intervene, Red Dog told the other man. Bah, I haven't started anything, Yurik spat. Pretty boy here is the one that's getting too big for his boots. If he doesn't apologize then we're going to have a problem, Geralt had told Red Dog. The bandit lieutenant just looked amused by his comment. A smirk appeared on his lips. It's not my job to make people say sorry, Red Dog replied dismissively. If you want a nice flowery apology then that's your business. I'm not too worried about it, or Yurik. Hear that? This is your problem, pretty boy, Yurik announced cockily. You don't realize that, besides the gal you're shacking up with, no one likes you or has any use for you. Soundlessly, the hobgoblin walked up behind Yurik and put a hand on his shoulder. His touch caused the big man to flinch in shock and turn his head around to see who it was. I like Geralt. He feeds me so that I don't get hungry, Black Nail interjected meaningfully as he stared into Yurik's eyes and grinned toothily. The unwashed man's green eyes widened and went completely still. His mouth hung slightly open as he stared uncomprehendingly at Black Nail. While Yurik's brain was trying to catch up, the hobgoblin turned and flashed Red Dog a grin. Hello. Black Nail announced cheerfully. Apologize, Yurik, Red Dog said grimly as he narrowed his eyes and scowled at Black Nail. I don't want, Yurik began to say. Shut your trap and apologize. Red Dog hissed. The bandit hesitated for a second and threw Red Dog a confused look, before complying. Black Nail just kept on smiling. I take back what I said, Yurik muttered grudgingly. Your apology is accepted, Geralt replied gratefully as he grinned cheerfully. The two other bandits scanned his face for any signs of smugness but didn't find any. He seemed genuinely happy to have the conflict resolved. Black Nail smiled and patted Yurik on the shoulder in a friendly manner. They were all friends here, for now. The bandit looked confused, he still hadn't managed to completely close his mouth. Come on, let's go, Red Dog told Yurik as he pulled the other man away. See you around, Geralt had told them. See, we can all get along if we try. Black Nail announced joyfully. I don't know how that idiot has survived this long. He must be the luckiest fool in all the north, Red Dog muttered to himself as he walked away. Black Nail thought that was kind of mean. Red Dog needed to relax more. Why did you make me apologize? Yurik asked the other man peevishly. The big man looked annoyed and his hands were balled up into tight fists. Red Dog gave him cold glare. Geralt's harmless, but you shouldn't give the hobgoblin a reason to dislike you. That monster will kill you for giggles and you won't see him coming. It would also get away with it just fine. It's smart enough not to leave proof and to make itself useful to Herad, Red Dog explained quietly. The hobgoblin wasn't able to hear any more because a beaming Geralt took a step down from the doorway and spoke up. Thanks for the support, Black Nail. It was nice of you to stick up for me and show Yurik that I have lots of friends, the unusual bandit told him. No problem, the hobgoblin replied as he waited expectantly. Here, have a treat, Geralt announced as he reached into a pocket. The man withdrew a piece of candied meat and tossed it to Black Nail. Thanks, the hobgoblin replied as he smiled smugly and caught it. He had been pretty sure Geralt would have a treat on him and that showing up would earn him it. He had the man well trained, so there was no way he was going to let some big stupid human injure him. Yurik is such an asshole. I don't know how Red Dog can stomach being around him. Someone should stick a knife in his back, Geralt muttered darkly to himself. Sure, Black Nail replied distractedly as he chewed. Yurik was now on the list, which meant the hobgoblin would get to him eventually. Black Nail didn't mind killing him for Geralt, but why was he so bloodthirsty? Whatever, humans were weird. Since you're here, do you mind running an errand for me? Geralt asked. I have some letters I need delivered. Mahedium is constantly sending out packets, so could you give mine to him? No problem, Black Nail answered happily as he finished chewing and wiped his hands on his shirt. A chore like this was sure to earn him another treat and it would only take a second. The hobgoblin grinned as he was handed several pieces of folded paper. What are these for? Black Nail asked curiously. He had never really understood the point of writing. Remembering things and sending people with messages worked fine for him. Most humans must have terrible memories if they felt the need to write so much down. I keep in contact with some of my family. I may be in exile but I hope to one day return when my bounty expires. Who knew killing a twat in a fair duel could get someone in so much trouble? Geralt had explained with a frown. Also, I left some of my clothes and other stuff with my friends. I have to keep reminding them I'm still alive so they don't sell it. That sounded very complicated to Black Nail. Why hadn't Geralt just buried his stuff somewhere no one would find it? Alright, I'll give these to Mahedium, the hobgoblin told the young bandit. If he let Geralt start talking too much the man would never stop. See you soon, Geralt replied as he waved Black Nail goodbye and stepped back into his home. Feeling happy to be helpful and fed, Black Nail wandered his way through the camp toward Mahedium's lab. The log cabin stood apart from all the others and most of the bandits avoided it. Many of the humans were superstitious and wary of the mage. There were a lot of rumors about the dark sorcery that went on in his cabin, but mostly they avoided the area because of all the explosions. The roof of Mahedium's lab had caught fire 3 times. After making sure Mahedium wasn't doing any dangerous experiments, Black Nail made his way up to the cabin's door and stepped inside. If he knocked it might disturb the mage, so he just stepped inside. The first room of the house was the living quarters. It was a rectangular room with a scattering of furniture. A bed, a table, and a bookshelf dominated the room. Loose papers and open books lay on all the surfaces. Black Nail ignored it all and walked over to the door on the opposite wall from where he'd come in. That was where Mahedium would be, in his lab. As he moved a familiar yet unexpected scent reached his nose. The smell really didn't belong. Black Nail's lips curled up into a grimace and his fingers curled up slightly as he contemplated the smell. Quickly, the hobgoblin pushed through the door and entered the lab. It looked like it usually did, only a few items had been rearranged inside. Tables and shelves full of equipment filled the room. Glass beakers, metal tubing, and crystals were everywhere. There were no windows, light was provided by glowing monocrystals hanging from ceiling or set in tabletop lamps. Mahedium had made them himself. The mage himself was leaning over a table and staring at a glass jar full of bubbling liquid. Beneath a beaker a small fire was burning steadily. The hobgoblin ignored all that and continued looking around for the source of the smell. A quick look from the door didn't work, so he took several steps into the room. Black Nail, what are you doing here? Mahedium asked as he stood up and removed the spectacles he had been wearing. The mage blinked several times and looked confused to see the hobgoblin. He was an average-looking man with short brown hair. Mahedium didn't even seem particularly old or young, just average. He was dressed in heavy trousers, a tan shirt that with long sleeves, and a thick leather apron. The apron was covered in burn marks and several unidentifiable stains of various colors. Black Nail stepped over and handed Geralt's letters to the mage. He briefly looked them over before taking them. From Geralt, Black Nail explained distractedly. The hobgoblin peered past the mage and continued to scan the surroundings for his target. Ah, of course. I had mentioned to him that I was going to send a bunch of letters out to Daggerpoint and other places, and he said he might slip a few letters in with my own, Mahedium thought aloud. Black Nail ignored him and kept peering around the room. The mage noticed his odd behavior and frowned. Are you looking for something? The mage asked. Yes, I smell it, Black Nail replied grimly as he sniffed the air again. A look of comprehension suddenly appeared on Mahedium's face. He turned away from Black Nail and glanced toward one corner of the room. The hobgoblin followed his gaze and noticed a small cage sitting on a table. Ah, I had Varhas capture one for me, Mahedium told the hobgoblin. I wanted to run some experiments on Scamp but he wouldn't let me. So, I had him trap some wild ones and test them for the mage gift. Black Nail peered into the darkness that concealed the contents of the cage. There was a shuffling sound from within as something moved. The hobgoblin's eyes adjusted to the darkness and the form of small creature became visible. It was a goblin. This was unacceptable. Why did people keep bringing goblins into camp without asking him? It was incredibly rude. How would they like it if he brought in a bunch of random humans and let them spread their scent, wander around, and pee everywhere? Rolling the dice 5. Black Nail stared at the goblin in the cage before him. The creature was hard to see in the shadowy corner of the lab. The only light was pale and came from the magic crystals across the room. Beside him, Mahedium continued talking. I keep it locked up most the time, Mahedium explained casually. I was afraid I was going to have to drug it or have it trained, but that hasn't been necessary. For some reason it seems mostly content as long as I keep it up high where it can see most of what's going on. The small creature in the cage was thin for a male goblin, but not unhealthily so. Its lanky form was hunched over as it regarded the hobgoblin that had suddenly appeared in front of it. Its eyes were what drew Black Nail's attention. Not only were they bright red but they shone with something more than animal cunning, patient intelligence. Black Nail didn't like that one bit. As the two stared at each other, a smug grin suddenly appeared on the goblin's lips. Black Nail growled softly in response. How dare this pipsqueak smirk at him? He was like 3 times his size. A second later, the goblin turned away and laid down in the far corner of the cage. The hobgoblin frowned at the unexpected action. Was that a sign of submission? Was it just crazy? Black Nail wasn't sure. Anyway, why had Mahedium brought this weird goblin here? This was Black Nail's territory. Humans shouldn't be bringing goblins into camp without asking him. He wanted to yell at the stupid human but he tried to keep calm. He had seen the mage blow up buildings before and set dozens of men aflame. There was no telling what type of monocrystals he had tucked away on him and Black Nail didn't want to find out the hard way. It would be better to keep things polite. Stupid human. Why do you need a goblin? There are enough goblins here. Black Nail asked with a hint of anger in his voice. Red Dog would agree with you, Mahedium chuckled. Don't worry, I only take it out for short walks and experiments. I have to keep it healthy if I want to draw blood from it. It's very convenient to have another source of mage blood and not have to constantly cut myself. Maybe I should get an apprentice? Anyway, my fingertips haven't been this smooth in years. Black Nail glanced at the lock on the cage door. It was a double latch. There was no way the goblin didn't know how to open it. The only reason it was still in the cage was because that was where it wanted to be. It just watches you do magic SS and stuff. Black Nail asked doubtfully as he turned to face Mahedium. I guess. It's just a feral goblin though, so it probably doesn't even know what magic is. It probably just likes the fire and flashing colors, the mage replied with an indifferent shrug. Black Nail threw a quick glance over his shoulder, back towards the cage. The goblin within was staring intensely at Mahedium's bubbling glass jar and the crystal inside it, but it quickly looked away when it noticed the hobgoblin's attention. The complete fascination and intelligence in that gaze unnerved Black Nail. The hobgoblin was more than willing to bet that the goblin understood a lot more than Mahedium thought it did. Stupid humans. How could they be so blind? It even responds to 1 or 2 basic commands, the mage added appreciatively. I see, Black Nail replied flatly. This goblin was deeply suspicious. Goblins didn't normally act like that. The hobgoblin squeezed his fist shut as he tried to rein in his anger. I don't like it. Can I kill it? The hobgoblin asked politely. Killing the goblin would simplify Black Nail's life greatly. What? There's no need for that. Here I'll show you, the surprised mage replied. The mage then reached down and unlatched the cage. The door swung open with a creak but the goblin didn't attempt to leave. Instead, it just looked up and gave Mahedium an inquisitive look. Out. Heel. The mage ordered it. Almost immediately, the little goblin stepped out of the cage and scampered over to Mahedium's side. It looked up at him with a dutiful expression, which didn't fool Black Nail for a second. Suspicious. Much to the hobgoblin's surprise the goblin then raised a green arm and offered it to the mage. Mahedium just shook his head, though. I don't need to draw a blood sample today. Good boy, back into your cage now, the mage said as he pointed towards the pen. Sure enough, the goblin quickly hustled back into the enclosure it had just come out of. It kept its eyes downcast in a sign of submission to both Black Nail and the mage the entire time. See, the little thing is remarkably well behaved and incredibly beneficial to my research. Including the production of your elixir, Mahedium told the hobgoblin proudly. Black Nail sighed in annoyance. The new goblin was a lot more obedient and useful than Scamp. Of course, Black Nail couldn't shake the feeling that it was just biding its time until it could murder everyone in their sleep. No one was perfect, though. The goblin was more of a prisoner than a member of the tribe, no matter how well it behaved, so Black Nail didn't feel the need to beat the snot out of it, so it understood the hierarchy. He was just going to have to keep an eye on the creepy little thing. Anyway, he'd delivered the letters, so he didn't see any reason to stay around here. Black Nail eyed the bubbling liquid on the table warily. Something might explode, and not in a fun way but more likely in a burning liquid in your eyes kind of way. Fine, it's your problem SS. I'm leaving, Black Nail told the mage. The hobgoblin then threw the little goblin an annoyed grimace and stalked out of the room. It was getting late now, so he decided to look for Cedar. His master should be starting to cook supper soon. By the time Black Nail arrived back at his tent, he'd somehow managed to pick up a few new interesting trinkets, including a small coin pouch. It was weird how people just left them laying around everywhere. Black Nail found Cedar seated next to his campfire. The old scout was stirring the contents of a big iron pot with a wooden spoon. The smell that rose from the pot as it cooked above the flames was heavenly. The hobgoblin's mouth immediately began watering. You're making stew. Black Nail exclaimed happily. The hobgoblin loved his master's cooking. Usually, he had to make his own food, and it was never as good as the stuff Cedar could cook. We've done a fair bit of walking recently, so I thought we should put some weight back on our bones, the old scout replied. Black Nail eyed the big iron pot. It was almost full. That was a lot of food. It was time to stuff himself silly. His delicious thoughts were interrupted by the sound of people approaching. Black Nail had to fight a sudden urge to spin around and hiss threateningly. It was his food. They would have to fight him for it. Instead, Black Nail just looked over his shoulder and scowled at the newcomers. It was Geralt and Vorsha. What did they want? Vorsha was his sword instructor, so he knew fighting her could only end badly for him. Geralt also had to be handled carefully. The man kept Black Nail well supplied with snacks. Black Nail didn't want to scare him away. Hopefully neither of them was after his food. What are you two doing here? Cedar asked suspiciously as he looked up from the pot. Do we need a reason to visit a good friend such as you? Geralt countered courteously. Yes, Cedar grunted in reply. You weren't invited. It's too nice of an afternoon for anyone to be spending it alone. We just felt like stopping by and enjoying the pleasure of your company, the younger man explained with a smile. Plus, you make really good stew, and I'm hungry, Vorsha added. We could smell it from across the camp. Too bad, Cedar told them. Leave. Black Nail wants us to stay, Geralt had told the old scout. The hobgoblin frowned. He really didn't want any such thing. I doubt that, Cedar replied gruffly. Do you? Vorsha asked as she grinned smugly and winked at Geralt. Black Nail, we brought cheese scones, her lover announced. The hobgoblin ears perked up and oriented themselves towards Geralt. The rest of his head quickly followed. His eyes instantly locked onto the bundle of cloth the younger man had just taken out from behind his back. They can stay. Black Nail declared quickly. Cedar glowered at both visitors, highlighting the lines of his weathered face. He looked like he was trying to think of some way to get rid of them. Ugh, fine, he sighed in defeat a few seconds later. Yeah, scones. Black Nail giggled happily. This meal was going to be so great, maybe even the best ever. Rabbit stew with cheese scones. He couldn't wait. Vorsha smiled and Geralt had placed the rolled up cloth on a rock next to the fire. The pair grinned at each other as they settled down on the other side of the campfire from Black Nail and his master. Cedar's fire pit was quite large, even if it was just a shallow hole in the ground surrounded by a ring of round stones. 2 nearby flat rocks could be used as chairs, and there was also a nearby collection of cut-up logs for people to sit on. Wait, why did his master have so many seats around his campfire if he didn't want visitors? Black Nail couldn't figure it out. Was the old scout going to use them for something? Bah, I suppose I cooked enough food to share, Cedar grunted as he started stirring the stew again. It goes bad quickly, anyway. His master's speech, and the intense stare Black Nail was directing towards the yet unwrapped scones, distracted the hobgoblin enough that the voice from behind him was a surprise. What's going on here? A newly arrived woman asked. No. Black Nail hissed in alarm as he realized who it was and spun around. It was Kida. She had probably come to steal some of his delicious scones and stew. Well, he wasn't going to let her. She was useless. There you are, Vorsha announced as Kida walked closer. Take a seat. I didn't say she could come, Black Nail whined. She's with us, Vorsha replied as she gave the hobgoblin a flat stare. Black Nail froze under her gaze. Good-natured or not, there was a steely edge to her gaze. She clearly wasn't going to accept any complaints from him. Why was the big woman always sticking up for Kida? She was useless. What's one more mouth to feed? She may as well join us, Cedar remarked sarcastically as he sat down on his favorite stump. Thanks, your stew usually tastes nice, the young woman remarked. Cedar frowned at Kida and pursed his lips. Clearly, he was insulted. Nice, he huffed as he shook his head. I've been perfecting this recipe since before you were a fire in your father's loins. It's the nectar of the gods itself, if that's what you want to hear, Vorsha told the old scout as she rolled her eyes. Kida took a seat next to Black Nail. The hobgoblin groaned and shuffled away. The cheese scones had better be bloody delicious. Hey, Black Nail. How did your last mission go? Kida asked Black Nail. Herat and Vorsha never let me go on any important missions. I'm either stuck here in camp or Vorsha is watching my every movement. It was all right. I snuck around, met a new friend, and killed a bunch of people, Black Nail remarked offhand as he waited for stew. He didn't mention the food he'd looted from the wagon. He wouldn't put it past Kida to steal it. Sharp. That's what I'm talking about, the young woman exclaimed happily. I want to go on a mission like that. I don't think killing people is a good measure of success, Geralt had interjected unhappily. It is if you're a hobgoblin, Cedar told the other man. Is the food ready? The smell is making me hungry, Kida suddenly asked. Close enough, Cedar replied as he got up. The old scout reached into a sack and pulled out a bunch of wooden bowls. One by one he filled them with stew from the pot and passed them out. While he was doing that, Gerlod finally unwrapped the cloth bundle he had been holding to reveal the scones within. It only took a few seconds for him to toss them around. Black Nail grinned as he caught his and took a bite. They were bloody delicious, so cheesy and yet so smooth and rich. There was silence as everyone ate, if you didn't count the hobgoblin smacking. Black Nail thought that this was fine, but Geralt had apparently found it awkward. The young man looked thoughtfully around at everyone else seated by the fire. Up in the sky, the sun was starting to set behind the western clouds. The clouds glowed a deep red as darkness started to set in. All around, the shadows grew thicker as flickering firelight filled the camp. So Cedar, what do you think of our current situation? From what I hear, Warwick is coming and he's bringing more than few men, the young man asked to break the silence. I think there is going to be a fight, Cedar replied stonily. Ugh, I don't want to discuss fighting right now, Vorsha interjected sourly. Here we are enjoying a great meal among friends. Why bring up violence? Imagine what will happen if she wins, though, Gerald pointed out. She'll basically hold dominion over all the north. All its wealth will be at her fingertips and part of that will be ours. That's a good point, Vorsha remarked as she smiled. Retiring from the bandit life with a chest full of gold sounds great to me. I could really use a nice mansion full of servants. That does sound nice, Geralt mused. It would have to be in Dagger Point, or somewhere else beyond the King's Writ, but it would still be much nicer than my current cabin. Especially if you were there with me, Vorsha told her lover. He looked uneasy and smiled sadly before responding. That does sound wonderful. Unfortunately, as you know, I need to be heading home as soon as possible. My parents and sister need me back down south, Gerlod replied. You're still a wanted man, Vorsha pointed out. The warrant for my arrest will eventually expire, especially if I get my hands on enough coin to grease the right hands. Bribes are the only reason I was ever charged in the first place. All I did was win a fair duel, the young man complained. And kill a man, Vorsha added dryly. There are duels all the time where I come from, back in Eloria proper. Some of them are even to the death, yet rarely is anyone arrested and sentenced to life imprisonment, Geralt had exclaimed angrily. Ha, you're all lazy or cowards. I don't plan on retiring ever. I'm going to work my way up to become Herad's most trusted lieutenant and maybe even eventually be her successor. Kida bragged. There was a lot of eye-rolling and skeptical looks from everyone else present. Black Nail tried to picture Kida as the leader of anything and failed. How could anyone ever be stupid enough to accept her as their chieftain? I don't think Herad trusts anyone, especially not her lieutenants, Cedar grumbled to himself as he got up and refilled his bowl. I don't think that's very likely. Everyone retires eventually, Vorsha told Kida. You really should be trying to figure out how to escape the criminal life. It will be an adventure. Kida replied defensively. Besides, I won't be alone. Black Nail won't be retiring to some stuffy mansion. He's a hobgoblin and they know how to have fun. Black Nail looked up from where he was eating the last of his scone. Bits of crumbs fell off his chin. I'll go where Master Cedar goes, he replied simply. This caused everyone to look Cedar's way. The old scout just frowned and sat back down. Bah, having dreams like yours is just a good way to be disappointed. Only fools believe in happy endings. You're better off just accepting things the way they are, he told the others. Black Nail put his empty bowl down and gave his master a questioning look. He seemed to remember Cedar saying something else a while ago. I thought you wanted SS to make Herad Queen of the North and kick the Southern King person in the balls. Didn't you say that? I think SS you did, Black Nail mused aloud as he tried to remember. Gerlod suddenly snorted in amusement and a huge grin appeared on Vorsha's face. For some reason, Cedar's face grew noticeably redder. The old scout winced and looked off to the side. I never said anything like that. Stop lying, Black Nail. You're imagining things, you stupid hobgoblin, he quickly argued. Ambitious, but I like it, Vorsha remarked. Ha, so much for not having any dreams. Geralt laughed. I should have known you had a reason for sticking around here. I wouldn't mind kicking a king or two in the nuts, Kida mused as she smirked. Those fancy bastards have never done anything for me. That was just something I said once as a joke, Cedar protested. Of course it was. Don't worry, Cedar. We all know you didn't mean it, Vorsha joked. As Cedar glowered, Black Nail looked around at everyone's smirks. He didn't get it. What was so funny? It quickly grew dark as the bandits talked and laughed. Soon, the only light was from their campfire or that of other nearby groups. By the time Cedar's guests left, almost everyone else in the camp had turned in for the night. With happy yawn, Black Nail went to bed. An owl hooted off in the trees as he walked over to his tent and crawled inside. Feeling comfortable, Black Nail curled up and fell asleep. However, his rest was disturbed by unpleasant dreams, and Black Nail tossed and turned in his sleep. A green maze of twisted trees surrounded him, and there was only a single path through it. Skulls and swords littered the ground as he walked. Coins slipped from his fingers no matter how hard he tried to hold them, and eventually he was all alone in the darkness. The hobgoblin looked up and saw a white light shining down the forest path in front of him. He reached out towards it. Rolling the dice 6. Black Nail smiled as his knife opened the helpless man's throat. Blood poured out of the raw jagged wound and spilled down his chest. The man's body jerked and twitched, but the hobgoblin held it still. A few seconds later, he went limp and Black Nail let the body fall. With an annoyed sigh, the hobgoblin bent over and began to roll the corpse over into a nearby clump of bushes, where it would be hidden. When that was done, he scuffed the dirt with his boot to conceal the blood trail. Cleaning up after himself was always such a pain. This was the second sentry he'd taken out today, and it was probably far from the last. There were undoubtedly a few more around the perimeter of the enemy camp. A lot of humans seemed to think that if they simply had lots of guards everywhere it would make up for the fact that they were all incompetent. It didn't work that way. The forest around Black Nail was full of thick green vegetation, and small hills lay scattered in every direction. This made spotting people difficult and hiding easy. To keep one step ahead of his prey, the hobgoblin needed a better view. Quickly, Black Nail pulled his boots and socks off. He took a second to wiggle his toes and flex his fingers before sinking his claws into the bark of a tall tree beside him. Then, he began to climb up into the higher branches to find a vantage point. The tree swayed ever so slightly in the wind once he got higher, but that didn't bother him. Up there among the leaves, Black Nail made himself comfortable and looked around. His flexible light body gave him excellent balance. Harad, Black Nail's great and deadly chieftain, had ordered the hobgoblin to head out and scout around the base where X-Men had set up. The other bandit chieftain's encroachment on her territory would be met with blood and fire. Black Nail had spent 2 days skulking around the forest by himself to get all the information his mistress had wanted. He'd been told to avoid being seen at all costs, and he hadn't even been allowed to kill anyone. This was the North. Who would notice 1 or 2 missing humans? There were hundreds of ways they could have gotten themselves killed or vanished. Most humans were so dumb Black Nail was constantly surprised they lived long enough to breed. Not his humans, though. They were remarkably intelligent, almost hobgoblin-like, really. Of course, Black Nail had only ever met one other hobgoblin, and he'd stabbed him to death several minutes after their first meeting. Still, that meant half the hobgoblins he'd ever encountered had been incredibly smart and handsome. He could not say the same thing about humans. Well, that was the past. He certainly had permission to kill now. The time for scouting was over. Harad's attack was underway. Black Nail balanced on a long branch as he studied the terrain below him. From his high perch, he could see the steep hill that concealed the enemy camp. It looked like the way there was clear. However, a pair of Werrick's men stood off some distance to his left. Difficult, Black Nail mused. It was practically impossible for someone to take down 2 sentries by himself without making any noise, and that meant it was sort of difficult even for Black Nail. The hobgoblin preferred easier targets, though. Why work hard? With this in mind, Black Nail swung below the branch he was sitting on and climbed back down the tree. Once on the ground, he brought his fingers up to his lips and whistled. The sharp cry of a bird echoed out through the forest as he blew. A few moments later, an answering bird call rang out from the wild greenery around him. Black Nail smiled as Cedar slipped out of the forest and walked over. The old scout was dressed in brown leathers with a dirty green cloak. He held a bow in his hands and there was a full quiver on his back. "We're all clear here?" Cedar asked. "Yes SS, there are no enemies around SS until we get closer to their camp," Black Nail replied eagerly. "Good, then let's go together in case we run into a larger group," his master suggested. Black Nail opened his mouth to agree, but he was interrupted by the sound of another bird whistle. His mouth snapped shut in surprise. That was their signal. "What? It's not the right season for real grey warblers to make that cry," Cedar remarked. "And no one else could possibly know we were using it." "I don't know," Black Nail replied nervously. "Maybe SS it's an ambush." Together, the pair peered off into the forest in the direction the sound had come from. Slowly, Cedar drew an arrow and strung it on his bow. Nothing moved in front of them. Instead, there was fluttering noise behind them. Black Nail flinched in surprise and jumped around. His long knife slid out of its sheath as he pulled it free in one smooth motion. Beside him, Cedar moved as well. The hobgoblin's heart pounded as he scanned the forest for the cause of the noise. There was nothing there, or at least he didn't see anything. Something had made the noise, though. Suddenly, movement made Black Nail look up at the side of a tree trunk. Perched there was a harpy. Its human-like face looked down at Black Nail and Cedar with amusement. It flashed them a toothy smile and then a familiar mockingbird cry issued forth from its lips. "Shoot it," Black Nail hissed in alarm. Harpies were dangerous. The large bird-like creatures had long talons on their feet and the tip of their wings. They were also very cunning. Cedar raised his bow to take the shot. Before he could do anything though, there was another flutter from the direction they had just turned away from. "Shoot it," someone or something said. Black Nail's head whipped around and he raised his dagger defensively. A second harpy was standing on a tree branch not too far away. "There's another harpy behind us, isn't there?" Cedar asked flatly. The old scout hadn't turned around. He had kept his arrow aimed straight at the first harpy. Yes, but 2 harpies aren't much of threat SS. I'll take one and you can SS take the other, Black Nail replied as he took a step toward the second creature. Before he could get near it though, the beast let out a muted screech and flapped its wings. Black Nail froze. They were still near the enemy camp. Raising a commotion would draw attention, and that would be bad. Don't let it make so much noise. Satyr hissed. Fine, you shoot both of them, Black Nail replied angrily. What did his master expect him to do? The hideous creature could fly. I can't get both of them at the same time, Cedar grunted in annoyance. So much noise, squawked the first harpy merrily. You shut the hells up, Cedar told it. Yay, no one asked you, Black Nail added angrily. Both, Cedar and Black Nail stood there silently for a few seconds as they contemplated their next step. The hobgoblin scratched his nose as he warily eyed the harpies. They didn't appear to be doing anything. What should we do? Black Nail asked his master. I don't know. The fucking things are probably just messing with us. I don't think they'll attack us, Cedar replied cautiously. The first harpy, who still had Cedar's arrow pointed at it, slowly hopped down from the tree. It landed on the ground and then eyed the hobgoblin and his master. Black Nail thought it looked smug. I want to kick it in SS the face, the hobgoblin muttered to himself. The harpy ignored him and began to crawl across the ground using the claws on its wings as another set of legs. Its motions were smooth and purposeful as it headed towards a familiar set of bushes. Oh, Black Nail remarked in surprise as he watched. The harpy slipped into the bushes and there was a tearing sound as it ripped into the corpse within them. Cedar's eyes widened as he realized what the beast was doing. He spun and pointed his arrow towards the second harpy, which was still sitting in the tree. In the face, the beast laughed merrily as it licked its wing feathers. It didn't seem concerned about the bow and arrow at all. Instead, it just continued cleaning itself while studying them out of the corner of its eye. The bloody fuckers. Cedar growled quietly as he realized what was happening. Black Nail's eyes narrowed as he came to the same understanding as his master. The creatures were extorting them. The harpies wanted the human corpses Black Nail had left in his wake, and if he tried to stop them they would create enough noise to raise the enemy's alarm. The hobgoblin grimaced and flexed his clawed fingers. Human corpses were worthless to him but he still didn't like the idea of being outsmarted and bullied by a bunch of bird brains. Let's kill them, he hissed furiously to his master. No, stop Black Nail, Cedar commanded him coldly. Leave them be. They're no threat to us and we have a job to do. The hobgoblin stared at the grey-feathered creature that was up in the tree. It seemed to have completely dismissed them as threats and was busy cleaning itself. Ugh, fine. Let's get out of here, Black Nail replied broodingly. Cedar nodded and the pair cautiously made their way away from the feasting harpies. The old scout kept his bow knocked but he let the string go loose. Job to do, a shrill voice whispered mockingly from behind him as he walked away. Black Nail clenched his fist but kept on walking. He'd killed harpies before and he would do it again. Next time, he was going to enjoy every moment of it, though. Soon, they were away from the flying pests. Black Nail and his master scanned the forest for further threats. While the harpies hadn't made too much noise they still had made some. It was possible they might have alerted someone. The pair of sentries he had seen from up above in the tree might not be the only ones around. We're good, Cedar remarked quietly a few moments later as he motioned Black Nail forward. The hobgoblin ground his teeth together as he stalked forward through the forest. The base where X-Men had built lay before him and he fully intended to take his frustration out on its occupants. Oh yes, there was going to be blood. He might even booby-trap the corpses as a surprise for greedy harpies. Black Nail stepped up to an old thick tree that sat atop a hill. From there its branches hid him and he could look down on the enemy camp. Cedar joined him a second later. The base was nestled in a large clearing. The tall dark trees of the forest surrounded it on all sides. The ground below was slightly sloped towards a small creek that ran through the middle of the clearing before disappearing into the forest. The camp itself was mostly a massive collection of blue tents. They filled the center of the glade. Off to one side lay a hitch post where dozens of horses were tied up, and men could be seen walking everywhere. It's weird how they have all those tents. They look new. Did Warwick buy them all just for this attack? Cedar mused. Does it matter? Let's just find SS the sentries and kill them, Black Nail hissed. It wasn't the hobgoblin's job to worry about such things. Harad could deal with it later. He just wanted to work out his bad mood. Cedar turned and gave Black Nail a critical look. Keep your emotions under control or you'll fuck this up and we will be the ones getting killed, the old scout told him. Fine, sorry, Black Nail grunted sourly in reply. The hobgoblin knew he was letting his rage slip out of control. Having the harpies steal his trophies was simply infuriating. It didn't matter that he hadn't actually wanted a bunch of human bodies. They were still his. There is a sentry over by that log, Cedar remarked as he pointed down below. I'll go take him out so we can slip closer, Black Nail whispered in reply. The hobgoblin mentally worked through a few basic sword forms to calm himself down, as he turned towards his destination. Discipline had been beaten into him by his master during his sword training. Suddenly, there was an outcry from below which caused the hobgoblin to flinch. Intruders! To arms! We're under attack, someone in the camp yelled. A chorus of answering shouts soon joined it. As Black Nail watched in dismay, the enemy camp came alive and dozens of men emerged from tents. The sentry below was quickly reinforced by a fully armed squad of bandits, and together they all disappeared into the forest. Uh-oh, this wasn't good. We need to leave. Let's get to the fallback route, Cedar announced as he spun around. What? No. They couldn't have seen us. Black Nail whined in exasperation. He wanted to hunt. This wasn't fair. What had just happened? Less moaning, more running, Cedar replied as he started moving. Black Nail growled in frustration before following his master back into the forest. As the pair ran through the woods, Black Nail managed to get his emotions under control. What's going on? How do they know we are here? Black Nail asked his master. They probably don't, we aren't the only ones here, remember, Cedar huffed back as he ran. Oh, right. Black Nail had actually forgotten that. Harad had sent several teams of scouts. Black Nail had just sort of assumed they would all hang back while he and Cedar did all the real work. Shouting could be heard behind them as Black Nail and his master ran through the woods back to their rendezvous point. The hobgoblin's long pointy ears also detected some closer voices. This is all your fault, a female voice whispered angrily off to Black Nail's left. Me? How could it be mine? I'm the scout here, not you, a deeper male voice answered. Black Nail sighed when he recognized the voices. He now knew why the enemy had been put on alert, incompetent people. Cedar apparently heard the sound of nearby people trudging through the forest but not their voices because he turned to the hobgoblin and questioned him. Who is it? Enemies, the old scout asked. Black Nail grimaced in distaste before replying. He wanted to say yes. No, they're allies, the hobgoblin replied hesitantly. Cedar nodded in acknowledgement and then dodged left. Black Nail jumped over a fallen tree and followed him, as they both veered off towards the newcomers. A few seconds later, the pair slipped out of the greenery and met up their comrades. Running out in front was the scout Varus. His pet goblin Scamp was scrambling alongside him, and trailing them both was the young redhead Kida. Varus looked shocked for a second as Cedar and Black Nail appeared, but he quickly calmed down when he recognized them. Ah, Cedar. Don't surprise me like that, the younger scout exclaimed as he kept moving. Oh, the boss is here, Scamp commented excitedly. The little goblin had obviously heard them coming. Black Nail squinted at the three running figures before him. He was pretty sure he knew who to blame for this mess and who had alerted the enemy. Varus was a good ranger and at home in the forest. Scamp was annoying but he could at least stay hidden, especially if there was work to do. That left Kida, the most useless one. Why are you here? You're not a scout, Black Nail asked her. I convinced Varus to let me come, Kida replied. Staying around camp was boring. The hobgoblin threw Varus a questioning look. He was disappointed in him. Varus seemed like a half-decent ranger but he kept surrounding himself with idiots. She said she could keep up, Varus muttered in reply. Cedar gave the other scout a cold glare. Next time don't let a pretty face sway you, he told him. For now though, just keep running and follow me. It sounds like there are people right on your tail. Sure enough, Black Nail could hear the sounds of pursuit. Several people were yelling and crashing through the underbrush behind them. The hobgoblin made sure he was running near his master at the front, where it would be safest. Where are we going? Kida asked. The rendezvous point. Just slow down for a second, Cedar replied as he gulped down air. The old scout was beginning to look worn out. His pace had slowed and he was wheezing for breath. Black Nail frowned in concern for his master. They hadn't been running all that fast. Is that a good idea with this many people chasing us? Varus asked as he looked back over his shoulder. Don't worry, I have a plan. A good ranger always has an escape route prepared, Cedar explained. Just make sure you follow my steps exactly. Up ahead, the forest opened up to reveal a sunny clearing. The old scout headed straight towards it. Oh, this plan, Black Nail remarked uncomfortably. He remembered this plan, it was terrible. He really hoped his master knew what he was doing. Did you place traps here or something? Kida asked as she ran up beside Black Nail. The young woman was studying the long grass that lay ahead of them suspiciously. They'd reach it and be out of the forest within a few seconds. Or something SS, the hobgoblin hissed in reply. He was too busy running to answer her more clearly and didn't really care anyway. Although, if she wandered off the trail she would ruin everything, even more than she already had. Stay close behind me and you'll be fine, Black Nail added reluctantly. All right, thanks, the young woman replied. The mismatched group charged out of the forest. Black Nail pushed a leafy branch away from his face and winced as the light from the sun hit him. Cedar was ahead of him and already stomping through the grass. Black Nail frowned and looked nervously around as he followed his master. Behind him came Kida. Much to the hobgoblin's annoyance, she seemed to be making a game of only stepping in his footprints. Holding up the rear was Varus and Scamp. The other scout didn't question Cedar's plan, but he had drawn his bow and was watching carefully for pursuers. Scamp was scampering along beside his master. The goblin looked more than a little spooked and hesitant to enter the clearing. Danger everywhere, he moaned as looked over his shoulder. Together, the group worked their way into the clearing. They were surrounded by long green grass and thick plants. Clumps of taller bushes and small trees spotted the glade, but Cedar led them away from those. They had barely made it halfway through the clearing when their enemy caught up. There was shouting as over 24 men burst out of the forest and stepped into the grass. The leader instantly spotted Black Nail's group. There they are. The grass is slowing them down. There's no way they can escape, he yelled as he pointed towards them. Unfortunately, Black Nail had to agree. The hobgoblin felt his stomach twist nervously. Cedar wasn't moving fast enough, and cutting a path through the clearing was slowing them down. They wouldn't be able to get away without a fight. Rolling the dice 7. Enemy troops spilled out of the bushes at the edge of the forest and into the clearing. Like Herod's own men, they wore a rough collection of leather armor. Hatred-filled eyes glared towards Cedar's party from unshaven faces framed by long messy hair. Those few that didn't already have weapons in hand drew them. Swords hissed free from sheaths and one of them pulled a war axe from off his back. Don't let the bloody vermin get away. Charge, their leader ordered his minions. Vargas immediately raised his bow to pick the man off, but Cedar put a hand on his shoulder and stopped him. Hold your fire until they get closer, Cedar ordered the other scout. I don't want them to scatter just yet. Vargas did as he was told, but he gave Cedar a doubtful look. The front ranks of the enemy contained over a dozen men and were closing in on them. They only had a few minutes until Warwick's men caught up. There were only 4 people in Cedar's group, 4.5 if you included Scamp. If you didn't count Kida as a full person, then you only had like 3.5, or something. Counting wasn't Blacknail's strongest skill. Scamp was sticking close to his master's heels and he looked terrified. His normally large eyes were huge as he gazed around nervously. He looked like he was going to run at the slightest provocation. Fine, but I hope your plan is a good one, Vargas grunted at Cedar. So do I, the gray-haired scout replied sourly. This didn't make anyone feel better. Kida just looked puzzled, but Blacknail groaned and Vargas looked like someone had just slapped him across the face. Running away would be a lot safer than this, the hobgoblin muttered to himself. Sure, not all of them would survive if they ran, but he would. He was the fastest runner here by far. Also, killing everyone else would probably slow the enemy down enough for Cedar to escape. Hey, they've got bows of their own, Kida suddenly interjected. Everyone looked over to see 3 of the enemies knocking arrows to their bows. They stood back as the rest of their group advanced. The enemy fighters were getting uncomfortably close. The tall man with the war axe was leading the way and there was a wicked grin on his face. Perfect. This way, Cedar told them as he turned away. Perfect? How is this situation anywhere near perfect? Vargas remarked in exasperation. Cedar didn't reply. He immediately led the others towards a clump of tall bushes off to one side. Before they reached it though, there was a whistling sound and 3 arrows tore through the air towards them. The first one was aimed too high but the others were more on target. One arrow zoomed a few feet wide of Vargas' chest. The other flew through the group and passed right by Kida's face before slamming into the ground with a thud. The young redhead went completely still when she realized what had just happened. Slowly, the color drained from her face. She lifted a hand up to wipe her cheek and drops of blood appeared on her fingers. She stared in shock. The arrow had grazed her and given her a shallow cut. If it had been an inch to the left she would have died. Don't stand there. Get down, you idiot. Vargas growled angrily as he pulled her toward the bushes. Within seconds, they were all behind cover. Blacknail peered at suspiciously at the nearby bushes and the tree in the middle of them. When he didn't detect anything off, his healthy paranoia then focused on all the men with swords coming to kill him. His concentration was broken though, when Kida's back pressed up against his side. What was she doing? He turned around and saw the young woman trembling slightly beside him. She still looked more than a little pale. As he watched, she shuffled even closer up against him, and accidentally jabbed him with her elbow. Blacknail winced as his ribs throbbed painfully. Ow, she was sure was bony. Cedar noticed the young redhead's behavior and the hobgoblin's confusion. She's in shock. Comfort her, he whispered. Why? Blacknail asked in surprise. That didn't sound like something he'd do. Because I said so, his master hissed back. And she might slow us down. I don't mind doing it, Vargas interjected hopefully. The scout was crouched next to Blacknail on the opposite side from Kida. He had been keeping watch on the advancing bandits. Now he was staring at Kida with a thoughtful expression, though. Cedar gave him a hard look that was completely devoid of amusement. Keep watch. You wanting to show off is what got us into this mess, he hissed at the other scout. Vargas looked reluctant and glowered at Blacknail for a second, but he turned back around. Blacknail had no idea why the man was angry at him. What had he done? This was obviously Kida's fault. How do you comfort people? The hobgoblin asked his master doubtfully. Tell her she's safe, Cedar answered. Would slapping her work? He inquired. That would be quicker. No, his master replied with an angry glare. Blacknail sighed in annoyance and turned to look at Kida again. She was huddled up next to him. Gently, he reached around to hold her shoulder. You're safe SS now, he told her as he patted her on the head reassuringly. A good pat on the head always made him feel better. In fact, he kind of wanted one now. Why had he suddenly become the person that gave out pats instead of receiving them? When had that happened? Thanks, but I just needed to catch my breath, Blacknail. That's all, Kida replied with a forced smile. Ha, I guess I'm lucky those arrows missed me. Her shivering had stopped but she still looked pale. Well, that was good enough. Blacknail quickly withdrew and took a step back from her. Your idea SS of luck is different from mine, Blacknail replied dryly. If I was lucky SS I wouldn't be here with you. For some reason, that totally truthful statement earned him a glare from Cedar, but Kida just smiled. Her eyes looked a little wet. Ha, you remind me of my brother, Blacknail, she told him. You joke around just like him. You also look after people. I'm better looking, though, the hobgoblin commented. He had obviously never met her dead brother but that didn't matter. Humans were pink after all, and that was a really stupid color to be. Green was just a much better color all around. The nearby bushes suddenly shook. Everyone flinched and ducked down low. A pair of arrows tore through the plants and slammed into the ground. Leaves were knocked loose and rained down over Black Nail and the others. After making sure he hadn't been shot, Black Nail turned and gave Scamp a kick. The startled goblin had tried to squeeze between him and Vargas, so he could use them as a meat shield. Why are we still sitting here? Vargas asked urgently. They're almost upon us. Cedar got up and looked towards the mass of angry bandits stomping towards their hiding spot. He scrutinized them carefully, as he pulled out his own bow and knocked an arrow to it. All right, now, he ordered the other man. Aim right towards their center. Immediately, both scouts rose and loosed their arrows. The shots schemed through the air above the grass and slammed into the approaching enemies. 2 of the men fell with shafts sticking from their chests. Black Nail had pulled out his own sling as well, so that he could help. He spun it and his stone projectile was launched into the air a second later. It hit the arm of an advancing enemy and caused him to drop his sword. Bloody hells, you bastards, someone screamed hoarsely. Get to cover but keep advancing. Spread out and surround them, a tall blonde bandit who had been standing near the back yelled. The other enemy bandits followed his orders. The mass of armed and dangerous-looking men split up into smaller groups. A few of them kept coming forward but most headed off to the sides where they could find cover behind the nearby clumps of trees and bushes. Before Cedar and Vargas could get another shot off, the enemy archers opened fire. The 2 scouts had to duck back out of sight as the arrows flew over their heads. Now what? They're circling around, Vargas asked as he crouched down low. Now we wait for a reaction, Cedar replied. They are reacting. They're running everywhere, Vargas pointed out. I'm not talking about the men, the older scout answered. Suddenly, a sharp crashing noise filled the clearing. Something snapped and there was a hollow thud. Kida flinched and beside her Black Nail jumped slightly. However, the hobgoblin quickly grinned as screams of surprise and pain filled the air. It was music to his ears. Cedar's plan had actually worked. They most likely weren't all going to die. The enemies that had headed into the thickets to find cover were under attack, by the bushes themselves. The tallest of the nearby trees had reached out and slashed at several nearby bandits. Familiar angry hissing reached Black Nail's ears, as the trees transformed before his eyes into mimics. They looked angry too. The giant, spindly, insect-like creatures tore into the bandits that had approached them with their many long-clawed limbs. Warwick's men were too surprised to put up much of a fight. Even the bandits well away from the fighting had stopped moving and were gaping at their distressed allies. They didn't seem to know what to do. A few of the enemy soldiers started to retaliate, but their blades either missed the mimics' flailing limbs entirely or bounced off their hard carapace. One of the tree creatures grabbed a man and then tossed him violently aside. Leaves cascaded down as the mimic moved to smash aside a new target. All right, now it's time to run again, Cedar informed his companions. None of them argued with him. Almost instantly, they were all on their feet and headed away from the fight. The end of the clearing and the way back into the forest loomed ahead of them. What in all the hells are those? Kida gasped in surprise. Did you bring those trees to life? The young woman kept as close as possible to Black Nail as she ran. Which annoyed the hobgoblin. Her eyes were wide with surprise and more than a little excitement. No, they're just beasts, mimics, Cedar replied dryly as he ran. How did you know they were there? Kida asked next. Obviously, I scouted this path out in advance, the old scout told her. How did you know? The redhead started to ask before Cedar cut her off. Stop asking me such stupid questions and run, he growled at her. Behind them, the sounds of battle continued. Someone screamed and there was a thrashing sound, like branches colliding. Black Nail risked a look over his shoulder. None of the enemies were chasing Herod's minions, and no arrows flew their way. The surviving thugs were backing away from the mimics, and the creatures were letting them. Cedar's party soon reached the far edge of the clearing. A wall of bushes and younger trees blocked their way. Are you sure there are no mimics here? Vargas asked Cedar. There weren't yesterday, the old scout grumbled in reply before pushing his way through. After a few tentative steps, everyone else quickly followed him back into the woods. The barrier of thin branches and greenery gave way to reveal a dark expanse of tree trunks under a shadowy canopy. Are we safe now? Kida asked when they were all out of sight of the battle behind them. No, they're not bloody idiots, girl, Cedar told her scornfully. They will have sent men around to cut us off. Oh, the young woman remarked unhappily. But you have a plan, right? Vargas asked. Preferably something better than sitting in the middle of a bunch of mimics and hoping the enemy walks into them before we do. Yes, we keep running, Cedar told him. Blacktail hadn't stopped. The hobgoblin ducked under a low branch as he continued jogging through the forest. He wasn't stupid enough to think they were out of danger, even for a second. The others were right behind him. It wasn't like he was slowing his pace to keep an eye on them or anything. He just knew it would be dangerous to run ahead alone. Rows of trees surrounded them on all sides. The ground was almost completely bare of anything but dark earth. Only a few short leafy plants and small ferns grew around the base of the thick smooth tree trunks. The group was silent as they ran between the trees, until Kida spoke up. She suddenly mumbled. Save your breath, Vargas huffed from beside her. But there's a dead guy right over there. Kida shot back angrily. Vargas' eyes widened as he turned in the direction Kida was pointing. Both Cedar and Black Nail's gaze quickly followed. A human body lay strewn over a tangle of roots at the base of a tree. The cause of death was obvious. An arrow jutted out from his back and his brown scout's cloak was red with blood. It was undoubtedly one of Herod's men, although without getting a better smell Black Nail wasn't sure exactly which. Shit, Cedar swore. They're ahead of us. Both scouts' cloaks swished behind them as they turned to survey the surrounding woods. Black Nail's gaze lingered on the fallen man's corpse for a moment. Maybe he should go through his pockets, in case there were any clues there. Incoming. Get down. Vargas yelled a second later. There was a shrill whipping sound. Instantly, Black Nail was laying face first on the ground with his arms shielding his face. He didn't have to be told twice. Stopping to think could get you killed. Arrows hissed through the air where he had been standing a second ago. There was a dull crack as one embedded itself into a nearby tree trunk, and Black Nail flinched in pain as the sound stabbed into his ears. Ah, that was too close. The hobgoblin didn't take any chances. From on the ground, he lurched sideways and started rolling towards the base of a tree where the roots would shield him. When he didn't hear any more arrows, Black Nail looked up and peeked out from behind his hands. His companions were on the ground around him, and none of them seemed to have feathered shafts sprouting out from uncomfortable places. That was good. Even better, Scamp was nowhere to be seen. The cowardly goblin had been running behind Vargas but had disappeared after his master had yelled. With luck something had already eaten him. More likely though, he had run off somewhere. The next thing Black Nail noticed was the squad of enemy archers stomping through the woods towards him. Several of them were already reaching for new arrows. We need to get to the road. Cedar yelled as he jumped to his feet. The old scout immediately dashed forward and placed a wide tree trunk between himself and the archers. Black Nail scrambled up and ran after his master. Vargas and Kida sprinted for cover together, sort of. It looked like both of them were trying to outrun the others so that they could use each other as human shields. Black Nail easily kept ahead of both of them. Losers. Another arrow flew past and cut through the forest. It didn't come close to hitting anyone, so everyone just kept running. A ledge came into view up ahead. Past a few trees, the ground suddenly fell away. Down below, the road could be soon on the other side of some bushes. Damnation, I meant to go around this, Cedar growled. The fall couldn't have been more than 10 feet but it was still an uncomfortable jump. They didn't have a lot of choices, though. Black Nail put on a burst of speed and raced ahead. A second later, he jumped off the edge and plummeted down. He felt his bones shake as he landed in a crouch on the ground. The hobgoblin ignored the feeling. He quickly stood up and glanced backwards at the ledge. Kida and Vargas were right behind him. The pair jumped over the ledge. They seemed to hang in the air for a moment before plummeting back down to earth. Both of them landed feet first and then rolled straight past the hobgoblin. However, Cedar hesitated a moment before jumping. Sensing a problem, Black Nail gritted his teeth and reached down inside himself to burn any elixir left in his system. There wasn't a lot but it would have to do. Jump and I'll catch you, he told his master. What? You don't need to do that, Cedar grumbled. Black Nail gave his master an annoyed glare, but before he could say anything shouting broke out on top of the ledge. It sounded like the enemy was very close. Cedar threw a look over his shoulder and then immediately jumped. The hobgoblin froze for a split second in surprise before reacting. He then spun to the side and reached out to scoop up his master's legs. As Cedar's weight descended Black Nail cushioned it. Then he lost his balance. The impact knocked him backwards, and Cedar landed on top of him. Ack, toad piss, Black Nail coughed painfully as he lay flat on his back. His master had landed right on the hobgoblin's chest. The impact had squeezed his ribs and knocked the air out of him. His lungs burned painfully when he tried to draw in a breath. Cedar got up, brushed himself off, and immediately started running towards the road again. It was only a few dozen feet away. Hurry up, Black Nail, he shouted. Don't just lay there like a log. The hobgoblin coughed again and pulled himself to his feet. He then quickly began following the others. As he picked up speed, he glared hostilely at his master's back. Some thanks SS would nice, he hissed to himself. When they got back to camp Black Nail was going to make sure Cedar paid him back. If he didn't then the hobgoblin was sure Vorshaw and Geralt would find the story amusing. Yes, he was definitely going to get something tasty or shiny. Kida and Vargas were already pushing through the bushes. Cedar was right behind them. Black Nail brought his hand up to shield his face as he stepped through the brush and out of the forest again. Your plan sucks, Kida remarked as she looked around the empty road. What now? Vargas asked. Do we make a break for the other side? Cedar scowled as he studied the surroundings. The wide dirt road was empty. It cut through the forest but there was nothing to see in either direction. The bushes a bit down the road shook as several enemies stepped out. They raised their weapons. Shit, we're right back where we started, Vargas cursed. Rolling the dice 8. More enemies stepped out of the bushes, until Black Nail counted 10 of them. The hostile bandits marched up onto the road and eyed Cedar's group. All of them were armed with swords and looked dangerous, like hardened killers. Capture some of them alive, their leader ordered the rest. We need to interrogate them. Black Nail weighed the odds. He had some elixir on him but he wasn't sure he could fight this many people and protect Cedar at the same time. The old scout looked worn out and Kida wouldn't be any help. That left most of the work up to him and Vargas. Unfortunately, he couldn't sneak his master away from the others so it wasn't like he had a choice. The hobgoblin drew his blade and reached into his pocket to grasp his vial of elixir. Vargas and Kida both took out their own short swords. Are we fighting? Kida asked Cedar. The old scout didn't reply. He was frowning and seemed to be staring straight ahead at the enemy, but Black Nail could tell he was scanning their surroundings out of the corners of his eyes. He was looking for something. That one looks like a girl, one of the larger enemies said as he grinned at Kita. I'm taking her. Just make sure they don't get away, the leader responded. The big brute raised his sword and stepped forward, just as an arrow took him in the chest. Blood sprayed from his mouth as he coughed and collapsed. A hail of arrows quickly followed the first. They slammed into the enemy bandits until most of them had fallen. Fucking hells, an ambush, the leader cursed as he backed up and raised his sword defensively. A new group of human bandits rose from where they had been hiding in the ditch along the road, but these were Herod's men. There was the sound of shaking leaves as more of them stepped out of the forest behind the ditch, including Red Dog. The bandit lieutenant scanned the remaining enemies. Swordsmen forward, take them down, he bellowed confidently. At his command, the men from the ditch drew their blades and jumped onto the road. They charged forward and engaged the now vastly outnumbered and injured enemies. Thank the gods! Varhas exclaimed as several of Herod's men ran past him. Black Nail let his sword drop. It didn't seem like his help would be necessary. We didn't really need their help. I could have taken the big guy, Kita remarked assertively. And Black Nail could have taken the rest. The hobgoblin gave her a skeptical look. How could she possibly believe that? Black Nail had seen Kita fight. She wasn't that good at it. Also, why did he have to do most of the work? There was the sound of blades clashing as Red Dog's men fought. Only a few of Warwick's men were left standing and they were quickly surrounded. Seconds later, they were all cut down. No prisoners were taken. Is that all of them or are there more hiding in the trees? Red Dog asked as he walked over to Cedar. That's all the ones that were chasing us, the old scout answered him. I was beginning to think you had gotten lost and missed the rendezvous point. I just had to wait until they were all out in the open, Red Dog replied with an indifferent shrug. It wouldn't have been a very good ambush if I didn't get them all. But the ambush would have worked fine if we all died? What if they had used bows? Varhas grumbled to himself. Did you get your job done? Red Dog asked Cedar as he ignored Varhas. I certainly did my part, and Black Nail did his, the old scout replied. We took out quite a few sentries before being discovered and led several more right to you. I'm not sure about Varhas, though. He let himself get distracted. I can see that, Red Dog said as he eyed Kita disdainfully. Varhas coughed and looked away. There was slight embarrassed flush to his cheeks. Hey, I did more than you. Kita interjected as she glared angrily at Red Dog. I was out there fighting and risking my life. All you did was stand here and order other people to fight for you. That's the burden of command, the bandit lieutenant replied. Burden my ass, you're just lazy, Kita told him. Cedar reached over and swatted the side of her head. Kita stepped back and glowered at him. Don't argue with the commander in the field, he told the young woman. There will be plenty of time later to tell Vorshaw all about how he put you in danger. Red Dog frowned at the old scout's words. He looked slightly nervous for a second but then he just scowled in annoyance. It was quick, but Cedar grinned smugly for a second in response. Since you feel so hard down by, let me escort you the rest of the way then, Red Dog said as he motioned towards one of his men. You there, make sure the small redhead stays safe. She might trip in a pothole and hurt herself. Also, you should watch out for squirrels, he told the man. The man in question froze and stared in confusion as Red Dog and Kita glared furiously at each other. He didn't know how seriously he should take the order. Either option could backfire on him. So, we're moving on then. Cedar asked to break the tension. Since you seem to have drawn the enemy sentries out of position so well, we should go join up with Herad. The main attack has probably already begun, Red Dog replied. What about the rest of the scouts sent out with us? Cedar pointed out. Most of them have already returned. I'll leave a few men here in case more show up, but I'm not going to risk sending men into the forest after them, Red Dog explained. As soon as he was done talking, Red Dog led the group down the road towards the enemy's camp. A wedge of sword-wielding bandits went first. Behind them came the archers, and in the middle were Black Nail and his companions. They arrived at their destination within a few minutes. The once hidden path that led from the road to the enemy's camp was now plainly obvious. Corpses littered the ground and boot prints were everywhere. The bushes on either side of the side trail had been hacked down to create a gaping hole that led into the dark forest beyond. I'm not a scout, but I think we should go that way, Kita announced as she pointed towards the mess. This earned her more than a few glares. However, no one took a step towards the looming entrance. The group came to a stop and took a moment to study the scene before them. Black Nail could hear the sounds of battle down the path, although the forest canopy muted the noise. He briefly scanned the nearby bodies. Most seemed to be enemies but he did recognize one of the fallen men. There was definitely a fight going on here. He hoped his side was winning. I don't suppose you'd mind taking a look around? Red Dog asked Cedar and Varhas. That brush there would be an excellent spot for an ambush. I think we've done enough of that today, don't you? Cedar replied coldly. The bandit lieutenant shrugged and motioned his men forward. The lead bandits carefully made their way down the path. When they weren't ambushed, attacked by wild animals, or maimed by traps, everyone else was quick to follow. And we're back into the woods, Varhas commented darkly as he stepped into the shadows. I hope Scamp catches up with us soon. The path itself was narrow but moving through the forest was easy. The ground was sparse and mostly bare from the lack of light. The only real obstacles were the trees and they were easy enough to go around. Black Nail followed the other members of his tribe up the shallow hill that rose in front of them. Shouting and screams could be heard on the other side of it, so that was probably where Harad was. She enjoyed that sort of thing. When they reached the top of the hill, Red Dog and Black Nail stopped and looked down. A lot had changed since the hobgoblin had seen the enemy's camp. It was in shambles. The massive blue tents were still there, but many of them had been flattened. Several were on fire. Harad was leading a push through the very center of the camp. Close to 100 of her men fought beside as she cut her way in deeper. The enemy's resistance was scattered and failing. Her sword flashed through the air and bandit after bandit fell before her. Damned fools, they're getting crushed, Red Dog remarked. They let their sentries get pulled out of position and then their rear was assaulted. This fight was already over once Harad got past the choke point back behind us, Cedar added. They should have defended it better. Doesn't seem like there is much left for us to do, Varhas observed without a trace of disappointment. Red Dog nodded in agreement. Across the valley, an enemy captain appeared to be trying to rally the defenders. He waved his sword above his head as he shouted orders. We'll stay here and pick off any stragglers that try and make it back to the road, Red Dog told everyone. The enemy captain didn't manage to assemble much of a force before Harad reached him. There was brief struggle as he was overwhelmed by Harad and her minions. With him dead there was no organized resistance left. The remaining enemies lost all will to fight. They fled. Harad screamed something that sounded both bloodthirsty and triumphant as her organized formation split up to pursue them. Bandits streamed throughout the camp in every direction and slaughtered each other. From so far away it was hard to tell who was who, especially since most humans looked the same. What about our share of the loot? One of Red Dog's men asked suspiciously. How are we supposed to get it from up here? You'll get it, don't worry. I certainly plan on getting my cut, Red Dog answered as he continued to stare down at the carnage below. Black Nail frowned in disappointment. He wanted to be down there with Harad. It looked like everyone there was having fun and that was where the best loot was. He didn't trust most the humans in his tribe. They would squirrel away all the good stuff and keep it for themselves. Ha, if all of Warwick's men are this soft then winning this war is going to be easier than pinching a fat man's purse. Kida chuckled. Do you remember us being chased through the woods? Black Nail asked her in dismay. I do. It was just a few minutes ago. That wasn't so bad, the young woman replied calmly. They fell into our trap. From off to one side, Varhas took a step closer to Kida and smiled at her. Yep, I had the situation completely under control. Rabble like the men chasing us were no match for me, he bragged confidently. The fucks? Black Nail exclaimed in disbelief. They had almost died several times. What were these morons saying? Kida was an idiot, and he had no idea what was wrong with Varhas. The scout didn't usually act this stupid. Maybe Kida was infectious. As Black Nail watched, a small group of Warwick's men broke away from the camp and headed his way. They had been hiding in some of the tents off to one side. It looks like we're going to have company, Varhas observed as he noticed them. Red Dog gave the approaching men a disgusted look. He didn't seem too concerned. There were less than a dozen of them and several of them didn't even appear to be armed. Idiots. Even if they made it to the road unmolested, how do they think they are going to survive in the woods without any gear? There isn't any shelter nearby, Cedar remarked condescendingly. They're cowards, what do you expect? Red Dog answered him. Black Nail just smiled and started humming to himself. These humans seemed to be acting pretty normally to him. Fear did strange things to men's heads. It made them easy targets. Sharp, the hobgoblin purred happily as he watched the fleeing enemies draw closer. He had been worried for a second, but it looked like the loot was coming to him. How lucky. Black Nail's group was waiting for the cowards when they crested the hill. After a very brief struggle, Red Dog's men put them down. Taken by surprise and unarmed, they didn't put up much of a fight. The hobgoblin killed two without even bothering to use elixir. Black Nail had made sure he was right at the front when the fighting started. That gave him an excuse to loot the bodies. Sometime after the hobgoblin had finished increasing the size of his bauble collection, the entire group of bandits he was with headed down to rendezvous with the others. The battle had ended a while ago and things seemed to have settled down. Black Nail led the way down the hill and through the trees. When he stepped out into the clearing, one of the first people he saw was Vorsha. Several other people were nearby as well, including Gerald. The female warrior was seated on a crate someone had left next to a tent. Her armor was covered with mud and several bloodstains, but she looked unharmed. She had obviously seen combat, but instead of resting she was busy cleaning her gear. A large long sword was balanced on her knees and she seemed focused on wiping it down with a cloth. Gerald was standing next to her and was inspecting a pair of daggers. Unlike his lovers, his armor looked perfectly clean. Hail the camp, Red Dog announced as he stepped out behind Black Nail. At the sound of his voice, Vorsha looked up and smiled their way. There you are. I was wondering how long you were all going to hang out up on that hill, she said. Just as long as we needed to, Red Dog replied with a shrug. The rest of his men and Cedar walked up as well. Kida was directly behind the old scout and Varhas was holding the rear. It's good to see you're all alive. I was a little worried when Kida disappeared, Vorsha told them. And I was worried when she showed up, Red Dog added dryly. I can take care of myself, Kida interjected in an irritated tone. Maybe, Vorsha replied doubtfully. Red Dog ignored the exchange and turned to his men. You can all stay here. I need to find the boss and make a report, he told them before walking off towards the middle of the camp. I don't really need them. I have sentries out and everything else has been wrapped up already. They can go where they want, Vorsha announced before Red Dog had gone more than a few steps. Immediately, most the men either found somewhere to sit down or wandered off. Black Nail started off to find something interesting as well. There had to be something nearby worth eating or at least something entertaining. Not you, Cedar told the hobgoblin. Stay here. I still remember all the trouble you got into last time you wandered off in place like this. The hobgoblin froze and scowled. He wanted to go look around but his master seemed determined that he stay here. That was no fun. Stupid naked lady, the hobgoblin muttered irritably to himself. It wasn't like he was going to run into another one. That sort of thing wasn't common, was it? So, did you see any action? We had quite a bit here, Geralt asked Cedar politely. You could say that, the old scout huffed. We got chased through the woods, shot at, and attacked by a bunch of trees, Kida bragged. Is that right? Vorshaw asked Cedar as she threw him an annoyed glare. I didn't ask her to come, Cedar replied as he shrugged. His words caused Vorshaw to sigh and turn back to her blade. After a few more wipes she resheathed it. Well, thanks for bringing her back in one piece, she said as she looked back up. You need to stop worrying about other people. You're not responsible for every hopeless case that wanders by. The girl needs to take care of herself, Cedar told Vorshaw. Yay, stop, Blacknail added irately. It was annoying how Vorshaw kept forcing Blacknail to look after Kida. The girl was constantly getting herself into trouble and she never even learned from her mistakes. Why did he need to be involved? That wasn't fair. Yay, stop, Kida said in imitation of the hobgoblin. I can take care of myself. Everyone ignored her. Geralt coughed and politely changed the topic of the conversation. I must say, this is quite the victory for us and our capable leader. I hope the rest of this little backwoods war ends like this battle did, he observed aloud. It was foolish of Warwick to leave this force unsupported. We cut it to pieces like a hog on a slab, Cedar told him. Maybe he didn't plan on us finding them or maybe he just didn't care, Geralt guessed. Logistics is a bitch, Vorshaw explained. Warwick has to move quite a few men from several different places to here. It can't be easy to do all that at the same time. Most likely he just made a mistake or one of his subordinates did. It's not like he's an experienced general and the man in command here didn't seem all that smart. Still, that's just another advantage Herad has. She's already emplaced and doesn't have to worry about being picked off in detail, Geralt added. We're going to need every advantage we can get. We've won this battle but not the war. Even after losing this many men Warwick will still outnumber us. Warwick can afford a mistake or two, Vorshaw explained as she cleaned her blade. All he needs to do is win one major battle and Herad's position will be shattered. There was a grim silence as everyone considered her words. However, Blacknail wasn't too worried. Herad had one other advantage that no one had mentioned. She had him. He was the greatest killer in the north, if not the world. Let the human named Warwick come. Death was waiting for him. Interlude, the working of magics. Mahedium stared at the liquid solution in front of him. It had been hard to find sulfur pure enough but it looked to be working now. The contents of the glass beaker were a nice rose color and bubbling satisfactorily. The hot coals beneath the beaker were keeping the temperature just right. Yes, he had a good feeling about this batch. With some luck, a new type of crystal would soon start to form within the solution. With even more luck, it would be useful and easily reproducible. If the gods were truly looking down on him then it would be something even the guilds hadn't gotten their hands on yet. Wouldn't that be a grand twist of fate? For all their money, connections, and corrupt hoarding of knowledge he could still get the better of them. It would just take hard work and a lot of luck. Mahedium turned away from his work and headed over to his desk. He was in his personal lab within Herad's camp. It was an adequate facility and he had filled it with all the tools he needed to do his research. Shelves lined the room. They were full of books, glass containers, and strange metal devices. The room was dark and only lit by several small lamps. A multitude of shadows lay thick upon every surface, but there was enough light to see by. The mage passed by a small wooden cage as he walked, and there was a shuffling sound from within. Mahedium instinctively looked towards the noise. The small goblin captive inside the cage was staring out at him. Its gaze was calm and steady without a hint of fear. I know what you want, Mahedium said as he reached into a pocket and took out a bit of sausage. The mage reached down, opened the cage, and then tossed the morsel inside. The meat had been part of his lunch but he hadn't been hungry enough to finish it off. Sometimes he forgot to eat at all when he was working on a promising experiment. There was always so much to do. He didn't bother to close the cage door again. His goblin helper, and that was how he had come to think of the creature, was always very well behaved after it had been fed. Why wouldn't it be? It had shelter and food here. Yes, goblins are very simple creatures after all, the mage mused to himself as he continued on over to his destination. When he got to his desk, the mage reached over to grab a lampstand. With practiced ease, he pulled the transparent crystal out from the top. As he was working, he heard the soft pitter-patter of footsteps behind him. Mahedium ignored the sound and took a second to examine the crystal, both with his eyes and with his mage sense. Since he was holding it against his bare flesh he could feel the power within the small mana stone. Its power tickled and warmed his skin. Mana stones had always felt almost alive to Mahedium, like they wanted to be used. It wasn't a very scientific belief but it was one he had never been able to get completely out of his mind. But then how much do we really know about such things, he mused to himself. Mentally, he reached toward the transparent crystal in his hand and ignited it. It flared to life and white light washed out across the room. The mage almost seemed to be holding congealed light aloof. It wasn't even warm. After a second, Mahedium grunted contentedly and then placed the stone back within the lamp. He had flared the stone just enough to light his desk. He could have burned it brighter, but then it would have lost power quicker and have to be replaced sooner. There was no known way to recharge a mana stone. He hadn't needed to actually take the stone out of its casing to light it, but he had felt like reveling in simple success for a second. He had felt so few of those moments recently. He was still alive and pursuing his research though, so he couldn't complain. Normally, to ignite a mana stone you needed physical contact. Mages had long ago developed ways around this, though. Activating magic by touch wasn't usually very practical. Certain metals conducted mana. If a conductive path was created between a mage and a stone, then it could be ignited without direct contact, and from a safe distance. You could have done that, although not with my finesse and control, Mahedium said as he turned to look at the goblin behind him. As usual, the little creature was placidly standing behind the mage and watching what he did intently. He was probably attracted to the bright colors, unique aromas, and other distracting byproducts of magical research. It was rather amusing how easily true intelligence could be imitated. Magic runs in your blood, just as it does mine. We are not similar in any other regard but in that we are brothers. Have we been chosen or is it just luck? Where does our gift come from? The mage asked himself contemplatively. A few seconds later, Mahedium sighed and turned back towards his desk. He didn't have time to think about such things, no matter how interesting. His work desk was covered in paper. Most of it was letters from various correspondents. Several of the messages were even in code. It wouldn't do for their secrets to be exposed. He had made quite a few useful contacts during his visit to Dagger Point. The renegade mage known as Murderous was particularly useful. His speciality might be elixirs, but he was in possession of more than a few interesting tidbits about mana stones as well. The mage stared at one letter in particular. It wasn't from Murderous, although it had passed through his hands. The sender had offered Mahedium an exchange of knowledge and favors. If they were telling the truth, then his research would be able to leap years ahead, if not decades. His thoughts were interrupted by the creak of a door opening. Mahedium frowned and glanced over his shoulder. A young man, barely out of adolescence, stood in the door. He was carrying a sack over his shoulder, and was obviously straining to support its weight. "Master, I have the charcoal you wanted," the young man announced. He was sweating from exertion and strands of his short brown hair were sticking to his forehead. He looked to be about 16 or so years of age. "Ah, thank you. Just leave it there by the door please," Mahedium told the new arrival. "Yes, master," the youth replied as he did as he was told. The mage had recruited his assistant in the nearby city of Riverdown. He was just a young man who had been down on his luck and seemed to have more intelligence than most street trash. Honest work was hard to come by these days, especially in the north. He had the mage gift too, of course. Mage blood was a crucial component of all aspects of magic, and Mahedium had grown really tired of cutting himself. He was lucky he used to be an herbalist and thus knew how to deal with infections. Now that he had both an assistant and his pet goblin, he almost never had to slice open his own fingers for a few drops of blood. Keeping the wounds clean had been such a pain. "Come over here, Ressus. I want to show you how to take care of this," Mahedium told the young man. "Yes, master," his assistant replied quickly as he walked over to the mage. On his way, the young man noticed the goblin standing over to Mahedium's left. He paused and stared at it suspiciously. "Should that critter really be left out?" he asked. "Sure, why not?" the mage replied absent-mindedly. "It's never been a problem before and it's quite useful really. I haven't seen a single mouse or rat around since I started letting it out of its cage. The bloody vermin used to get into all my herbs. I even found a nest in one of the pots a while back. That isn't sanitary." "All right," his assistant commented as he walked over to peer over his master's shoulder and see what he was doing. "I started this culture while you were gone," Mahedium explained. "It should be done in a few hours. During that time, the heat must be kept steady so you have to replace the charcoal if it gets low." "As you wish, master." "That sounds simple enough," his assistant replied unenthusiastically. Mahedium sighed and shook his head. Why did Ressus sound so apathetic? They were studying magic. "You have no idea how lucky you are," the mage accused the young man. "You're learning secrets here that men would kill to possess. If you were to join one of the mage guilds you would end up as combat fodder and would never be allowed anywhere near real magic like this." "Yes, master." "Sorry," Ressus quickly replied as he flushed in embarrassment. "The guilds keep all their secrets locked up in their colleges. Unless you're of noble blood or politically connected you would never be able to create your own spell stones, no matter how intelligent you were." Mahedium ranted. "They would keep you reliant on them, and you would be nothing but a pawn in the games they play amongst themselves." "I am very thankful, sir," his assistant replied, but it was obvious the mage wasn't listening. "The petty quarrels of the mage guilds are almost as harmful as their squandering of magical knowledge," the mage continued irately. "It was right before the old empire's collapse that the guilds first came into power. Now, they have benefited more than anyone else from all the constant warfare. They have grown rich and influential by selling war magic." Mahedium lost his train of thought and froze. His hands were held up above his head dramatically and there was a confused look on his face. Why were they discussing history? Didn't he have research to do? "What was I just talking about?" he asked Ressus. "You were showing me how to take care of the crystal culture here," his assistant replied dryly. "Ah, yes. That's right. Just check in on it every few minutes and to make sure the heat is kept steady. If a mana stone starts to form within it, inform me at once," the mage told the young man. With that done, Mahedium made his way over to a different table. What looked to be a disassembled staff lay upon it. Small metal bits and gears were scattered around a long wooden rod. The staff had holes of various sizes in it and seemed to have a metal core. Right now, however, take a look at this. I'm in the process of creating a new focus device. It's important that you understand at least the basic concepts involved in such a thing, the mage explained excitedly. Ressus was just hired help. He wasn't being trained as a researcher, but he needed to know enough to lend a hand and fetch the correct tools. There is practically nothing magical about a staff or amulet, the mage added. Their purpose is to simply hold mana stones and channel their power in the correct direction, although they are sometimes reinforced by materials from crystal caverns. Most mana stones are far too dangerous to ignite by hand, and the results would be unpleasant anyway. Even a simple heat stone would burn the user. What does this staff do? His assistant asked. Mahedium smiled smugly before responding. He had been working on this idea for a while. My army staff is fine for producing light, heat, or explosive force, but now that I have mastered producing other types of crystals, I need something with more punch, he answered. The young man just frowned thoughtfully and threw his master a questioning look. This just made the mage feel even smugger. I've had problems piercing hard targets recently, such as giant mutant snakes, Mahedium explained. Once finished, this staff is designed to fire crystalline spikes. A force stone located here will propel the projectiles created by a second mana stone in this chamber. Giant mutant snakes, his assistant asked in surprise. You're kidding, right sir? No, that was just a few months ago. The deep green is full of such things, or so I hear, Mahedium answered absent-mindedly as he stared at the disassembled staff before him. It's unlikely another one will show up, but it would make a great weapons test. Behind him, the goblin had turned to look at the beaker of liquid Mahedium had set up earlier to grow a crystal in. While the mage and his assistant had been talking, it had turned black and started to boil with ever-increasing fervor. The goblin eyed it for a second and then hurriedly backed away. Less than a second later, he was back in his cage and the door was firmly shut. The noise attracted Mahedium's attention as well. He looked up and stared at the beaker. You were supposed to keep the heat steady. Quickly, remove the coals, the mage ordered his assistant. The young man quickly spun around, but he froze when his eyes took in the sight of the black boiling liquid. He clearly didn't want to go anywhere near it. Don't worry, it's perfectly safe, the mage reassured him. Ressus reluctantly stepped forward, and Mahedium reached into one of his pockets. Carefully, the young man picked up a small rod and pushed the metal charcoal tray out from under the beaker. There was a loud bang as it exploded. The glass container instantly shattered and the liquid expanded outwards in a black cloud. Shards of black crystal shot out of the smoke. They flew around the room and several of them slammed into Ressus. His eyes went wide with shock and he crumpled bonelessly over backwards. Mahedium had been ready, however. His hand came out of his pocket holding a small steel amulet. The gem set in its center glowed. A see-through barrier appeared in front of him and the crystal shards headed his way, shattered against it. Mahedium dropped his shield and tucked the amulet back away. He hadn't really expected the beaker to explode. Something like that had been a very low probability outcome, but it paid to be prepared. Ressus' body was lying on the lab floor. Several long black crystalline shards were impaled in him. One of them had pierced his left eye, so he was obviously very dead. The mage looked at his deceased assistant and sighed regretfully. He had actually liked the young man. He had shown a glimmer of promise, if only a glimmer. Oh well, it wouldn't be too hard to find a new assistant. He would undoubtedly be moving around a lot soon anyway, so having him underfoot might have been an inconvenience. Better to use disposable helpers for now. The knowledge he could glean from his experiments was worth the lives of a few assistants. They were just uneducated and unmotivated mage gifted anyway. There were always more of them around. Mahedium threw a glance back towards his desk. There was a big battle coming and he had a crucial part to play. As a mage, the power he commanded could easily turn the tides of war, and he was just getting stronger as he learned to harness new spells. One day his magic would change the world. Now though, he had better call someone to remove the corpse from his lab. It might contaminate something. When that was done, the mess from the explosion had to be cleaned up and the experiment restarted. Even magic could be tedious sometimes.